to replace the canister, the propane, and cook this. So I can work. We didn't need a longer lunch hour. I can do this.
It'll be good.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to let you know, we have 6 people signed up for the from school districts on the COVID-19 topic. We have Janine Bayteski and Gillian Chapman from Teton 1, and then Charles Oski, Clark Colberly, representing, I believe, small school districts, and then Boyd Brown and Jay Curtis.
All right, I'll see if I can find that list. I got it. Let me see if it corresponds to your list.
So it may be best to do the WDE and then the Gov's office, because both of those are interrelated with education funding, and then do the public comment.
Yep, I think doing both together is right.
Okay.
Text me those names if you would, please, Matt.
You bet.
Thanks.
I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Oh, good. Landon, are you doing 2 jobs at once?
I'm doing 2 jobs at once, plus trying to pack a house and move.
Oh, good for you.
So yeah, I'll be taking off at 1:30 for a 2-hour meeting with work, and then I will be back hopefully around 3:30 or 4 o'clock.
Righty.
Landon, where's your new house?
You know where Thomas Heights is at?
Nope.
Thomas Heights, it's in between College and Ridge Road. Up in it's a pretty brand new subdivision. So
Yeah.
Is that still in your district?
of course it is, specifically for that reason.
Hey, Landon, did they get grass in over there? I know it gets pretty dusty when the wind's blowing. Do you have
It's,
grass?
It's got grass up there. There's no doubt about it. Yep.
Good, good. It's a nice little area.
It's about the only place in my district that I could move and have new construction. So it was kind of tough to find something, but we found it.
Cute choice.
We're shy on the Senate side, or else we could start.
Hey, Landon, when's your wedding date?
October 10th. We're going to be in Ormond Beach, Florida. As long as there's no hurricanes.
Guess you didn't give him long enough to eat, David.
Here he comes. Here he comes.
There we go.
It's kind of ugly on my side too.
As far as getting something to eat.
Well, it's not very far to the restaurant, but the menu is pretty limited, and the cook is terrible.
Oh, and it's his initials, JP?
So, Mr. Chairman, how are you?
I'm good, Mr. Chairman.
About 2 o'clock, senators take a nap in the afternoon.
I understand.
I don't know how many of you heard my famous story that Randall Lucy told. He said about 2:15 one day, the floor of the Senate, guy collapsed with a heart attack. They called the paramedics, hauled out 3 other senators before they found the right one.
Well, I'm speechless. I don't know what to say. All right, well, we got enough to get going again. I think we got a quorum on both sides. So we'll start this back up. We're at the item number 14, which is the COVID-19 pandemic discussion, which actually was supposed to take place at 10:15. So we're just 2 hours behind. We have elementary and secondary emergency relief fund of the CARES Act funding for the school program and other updates. And that's going to come from Dickie Shaner and Shelley Hamill. Good afternoon, Dickie. How are you doing?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Take it away when you're ready.
All right, is Shelley on?
I am, yes.
Great, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members. Shelley and I are going to talk to you about the CARES Act funding, and we submitted the memo. The memo we submitted focused on what we're calling ESSER, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, which is sort of the biggest singular pot of CARES money directed solely at K-12. But there's also the GEAR funding, which Lachelle Brandt's going to speak to you about, which is the governor's funding to go to education. And then the $1.25 billion that you all worked on during your special session, a portion of that first wave. Also, we anticipate going to K-12 as well. So really those three streams are the main K-12 streams. So the ESSER, GEAR, and a portion of that $1.25 billion. Related to the ESSER funding, Wyoming is set to receive about $32.5 million in that. 90% of that, so roughly $29 million, will go straight out to districts based on their portion of using the same formula we would for Title I money. We will be using to distribute that funding as well. But it's not Title I funding in the sense that it's broad discretion for use. Anything related to the current pandemic or anything related to planning for a future pandemic is an acceptable use of those funds. So a lot can fall under that umbrella. And then we have a 10% set aside amount, which will go to what the feds refer to as statewide activities. You can see we mentioned in our guidance what that may be. Could be to support technological capacity and access, also furthering remote learning. So we'll be exploring that next in terms of how we're going to spend that for the statewide activities. And with the 1.25, I will let Lachelle can elaborate on that as well. But right now, because that goes through the governor's office, as you know. But what we're looking at for that, and it was touched on just before lunch, is trying to address the device gap and then sort of the access or hotspot gap with school districts, as well as any shortage in funding for keeping up with summer nutrition programs for school districts. So those three pieces are what we're looking at in terms of using that 1.25 billion. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I can turn it over to Chief Hamill.
Chief Hamill, take it away.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I'm just going to quickly provide an overview about the food service efforts that have occurred since the national emergency was declared on March 13th. So at that time, all participating school districts were providing meals to students under the National School Lunch Program. The unexpected school closure allowed for a waiver to be submitted by the WDE. This WDE waiver allowed districts to serve meals during the closure of the brick and mortar buildings by shifting from using the National School Lunch Program over to a different program called the Summer Food Service Program. All districts in the state were invited to move to this program or to begin participation if they weren't already participating in the National School Lunch Program. All of the districts that were previously participating made the switch over to the Summer Food Service Program. So there were also additional waivers that were submitted by the WDE nutrition team to USDA to allow the processes that are currently in place. So these waivers allowed for districts to adjust to serving meals in situations where social distancing was paramount. For example, meals could then be served without requiring students to stay and eat on site, which of course that congregate feeding areas, a large group of people, not conducive to COVID. Flexibility in the meal component, so looking for ease in packaging for carry out or delivery, allowing families to pick up meals. Other components of the waivers addressed really just the basic needs of feeding our youth. And so meals are available to be served to anyone through the age of 18, so even preschoolers. Multiple day meal provision was allowed. So when parents come to pick up meals, or those are distributed at different locations in the community on Fridays, there are also meals for weekends available to be taken at that time. So currently we have 250 sites serving meals across the state. These are approved through a waiver to continue serving through the month of June, so until June 30th. Now, 100 of those sites are considered eligible sites. That's based on an area census and poverty count. Those sites will be able to serve through August 31st. The other 150 are area eligibility based on a waiver that the WDE submitted. We have, and that'll end on June 30th. So we have submitted a follow-up waiver to request that those serving areas be allowed to continue through August 31st, consistent with the other sites, but we haven't heard anything back yet. So really, just to recap, the district's been working really hard and creative in providing meals in their communities. They've established a packaging system, curbside pickup. Some of these happen right at the school where the meals are provided or prepared. Some of those meals are loaded onto buses and moved to different sites in the community that are closer to families. So with that, that's kind of the report on nutrition. I'll turn it back over to Chief Shaner.
Senator Ellis, you have a question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just a point of information. I visited with First Lady Gordon, and as many of you know, she's got a hunger initiative, and her staff sent me some follow-up suggested language that maybe our committee could consider sending a letter of support for that waiver to the USDA. And so before we leave this topic, I just thought I'd throw that out for discussion, and can send us some draft language to get the ball rolling to support that effort. But just wanted to thank you for that testimony.
Representative Connolly, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you, Dr. Hamill, for the presentation. I'm curious if you know how many meals were distributed during the period from the close down until the end of the school year?
Good, Shelley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Representative Connolly. I don't have the numbers to make that, or from the time that there was the close down until now. I can get that for you and provide that. I do know that overall, school districts are providing, if we compare this April's meal count to April of 2019, there are fewer lunches being provided, but there are more breakfast meals being provided. So what we're seeing happening is that while there are likely there are less students participating in coming to pick up those meals, or families than the students that would be actually participating in the lunch program if school was in session in the building. But because of the numbers of kids that are coming, or families that are coming to pick up those meals, the breakfast count has increased. So overall, there are fewer meals being provided than there were a year ago.
Representative Simpson, you were first.
Thank you, Shelley. I appreciate that report. Could you help me understand where the revenue comes for the summer food services program? And then a second question is, I was visiting with a couple of young mothers that were taking their kids by to grab some lunches. And I personally know that their husbands and their household is six-figure digit incomes. Was there no restriction on what the household income is? Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Simpson. So there is not a restriction. Part of the waiver allowed for all youth to be provided with meals through the age of 18. So districts were not necessarily, or they weren't restricting meals being provided to folks. And I've already forgotten your first question. I'm sorry.
Where's the money come from?
Oh, thank you. So the money comes from USDA and the school district through the block grant. Then I know there's not a line item specific in the block grant that goes to districts for meal service, or maybe I should say there isn't one in our state budget for that. But the summer food service program provides what they call a reimbursement, but it's not a full reimbursement. So by switching to the summer food service program, districts are being reimbursed at a little over about $4 a meal. And that would be to cover all the components of the meal, the delivery, the preparation, etc.
Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Ellis, you have another comment, question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the First Lady's office sent me a spreadsheet and it's titled Communities That Can't Serve After June 30th. And some of the communities affected are places like Lovell, Cowley, Saratoga, Glen Rock, Douglas, Sundance, DuBois, Pavilion, Kemmer, Big Piney, Lyman, Ten Sleep, Upton, Mountain View, Afton, and Pinedale. And it says under one of the columns, it has listed April meals served. And I don't know this. I think my guess is that would be meals served since April. I don't know if that just means 1 month, though. We could probably ask for some clarification. But if you add up the number of meals for those communities, it does add up to around close to 173,000 meals. So my guess would be it's from April till current or something like that. But we can get more clarification. But I think that gives us an idea of how many meals.
Sounds great. And you had, Senator Ellis, you had some examples of the language for the letter you would like written?
Mr. Chairman, I reached out to the First Lady's office and asked specifically if they would give us some language, and I can circulate some ideas. But after listening to the testimony today, I think if we wanted to, fine tune that and have LSO put their touches on it, that would probably be appropriate.
All righty, thank you. Anybody else have any questions? Go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This question is for Shelley. So if I heard you correctly, you served fewer meals for the summer program than you would have if we were serving these meals if the schools had been open.
Is that correct, Shelley?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchings. So it's not necessarily completely able to be pulled apart that way, because there are many districts that did not participate previously on the summer food service program. But because all of the meals are being served now through that, it's kind of an apples to oranges type of comparison. So I'm not sure that we can really make that straight across, but overall, it does appear as though that there are fewer lunch meals being served than on a typical, like April to April, than there were from this April to last April. And there are greater numbers of breakfasts because as the families come to pick those up, they're both packaged together. So.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments? Then we'll move on to the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund and the CARES Act, and that's by Lachelle Brandt. Lachelle, are you up there? There you are.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. My name is Lachelle Brandt. I'm Senior Policy Advisor with Governor Gordon's office, and I appreciate the opportunity today to provide a status update on the Governor's Education Relief Funds. As Deputy Shaner mentioned, there are requests that have been submitted to the Budget Advisory Response Team for remote learning, nutrition, and PPE. And those are currently under review as part of the $1.25 billion. And this money is additional to the $1.25 billion. As pointed out in the first paragraph in the memo that was provided to you, this flexible funding was provided to governors as part of the Education Stabilization Fund through the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act. The funding was based on a formula stipulated in the legislation with 60% on the basis of the state's relative population of individuals ages 5 to 24, and 40% was based on the state's relative number counted under the Elementary and Secondary Education Act of 1965. So Wyoming's total allocation is $4.7 million across all of education and other education entities. As Deputy Shaner also mentioned, the governor's application, I believe, was approved on June 1st. And it's important to note that he has until June 1st, 2021 to award the funds, and they remain available for obligation through September of 2022. The governor has wide discretion to allocate the funding based on his evaluation of the greatest educational needs and most significantly impacted by COVID-19. So what our office elected to do was to use stakeholder input as well as the governor's COVID education task force to identify what the current greatest needs are P20. Proposals were submitted to our office from school districts, higher education, early childhood, and other education entities. And what we found was the common theme across all of education currently was the need for additional support for students transitioning from pre-K to K, 12th grade to higher education, and adults to the workforce. The governor's education task force reviewed all of the proposals and made recommendations to the governor regarding the use of the funds. The total amount requested was $9.2 million. With this being one of the most discretionary funds with a longer timeline and to avoid duplication, we chose to hold half of the funds, approximately 2.3 million, and move forward with awarding the first half of the pot of money. And so those first allocations will be focused primarily on immediate needs related to transitions for students moving from face-to-face to online and distance education. And then we will look at the second half of the funds after the ESSER funds that Deputy Shaner described and the other CARES money has been expended to ensure that there's a continuity of learning for all students, and then determining what the greatest needs after those funds have been spent. State agencies are required to be the fiscal agents for these funds. Therefore, we will award a total of the $2.3 million to the Department of Education, Workforce Services, Family Services, and the Community College Commission. They will be the pass-through agencies. The agencies will be responsible for distributing the funds through their existing systems to the education entities that submitted the proposal at each level. That will ensure that the funds will be accounted for in the event of an audit. And the majority of the funds will be awarded on the percentage of funds available to the ask within their proposals. I would like to point out that we did fully award 4 entities that requested funds, and that was Sheridan School District number 3, primarily because they won't be receiving any other CARE dollars. They are not entitled to receive the ESSER funds. And then the Carbon County Boches, the Wyoming Behavioral Institute, and the Array School of Design and Technology. And again, that was because they won't be receiving any other CARES money. To give you an indication of some of the needs that were submitted in the proposal, examples of that were to support children entering early childhood and K-12, some social emotional learning support for students, developing plans for students identified with the most significant learning gaps, partnerships between K-12 and higher education to support 2020 graduates transitioning into college and or careers in the fall, student support for advising, student engagement, and telehealth, and then apprenticeship programs that needed assistance to help students complete their education that was disrupted by the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would stand for any questions.
Any questions for Lachelle? All right, go ahead, Senator Hutchins.
If I can unmute. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lachelle, can I get the name of that third organization that received full funding after the carbon BOCES?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Hutchins, that was the Wyoming Behavioral Institute.
Further questions or comments for Lachelle? All right, none appearing. We'll go to public comment. So I have a list of people for public comment. I have Janine Bay-Teskey, Gillian Chapman, Charles Agalzi, Clark Coberly, and Boyd Brown and Jay Curtis. Oh, and there's Janine. Janine, it's all yours. Take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And many thanks to the staff for helping to manage this new way of communicating, but I sure miss seeing you all in person. I'd like to talk about the impact COVID has had and what I think about as things are moving forward. The only thing I know for sure is there's probably as many unknowns as knowns as we're moving forward. And I look at the impact of COVID as sort of a three-legged stool. There's the impact of the disease itself, there's the economic impact, and then there's the mental health impact. And one thing we have to keep in mind is, I know there's states around us that have been talking about maybe part-time processes for sending our students back to school in the fall. But I just want us all to remember that many parents rely on schools as they're going back to work as a means for them to be able to go back to work. And so to say that we're talking about opening up on a part-time basis is a little concerning to me in the face of this. And I'm sure Gillian will talk a bit more about how students learn online and not. There's a couple of slides that are in your materials from our food service folks. And it was sort of interesting. These were slides we went through as we were doing our budget planning process about a week and a half ago. And it's interesting to see how some of the things that we're all facing as we go to the store, our school district is facing as well. For example, the uncertainty of food prices, and consequently, it's very difficult for our food service director to get commitments on pricing. Eggs and milk have gone up 20% in the last month. As you all know better than I, in some of the businesses you're in, that many of the food processors are shutting down. We do struggle with families applying for free and reduced lunch, particularly some of our Latinx families that wonder about the connection to ICE and whether they'll be deported or not. And the other thing I wanted to talk about briefly on food service was that as we move forward, it's likely to cost us more money because at the present time, our food service lines have been self-serve. That I don't believe will any longer be permitted. So there's extra resources that are going to be put into there. There was a question that came up about how many lunches or how many meals are we serving? Teton County since mid-March has served over 42,000 meals. And the process presently is you can go to the high school and pick up meals, or there's 36 different bus stops that we offer meal service at. So kudos go out to our classified staff for really making this whole process work. One of the other things I wanted to chat about is, we've talked in the past about teacher shortages. I have to tell you, Brian and I read a lot of stuff that happens at the national level. There's a lot going on at the national level that talks about the potential for huge teacher shortages as a result of potentially as many as 20% of the teachers not wanting to come back into the classroom for fear of being exposed and getting sick. So as we're moving forward, this is kind of interesting to me. And, you know, our staff has done an extraordinary job in picking up the adaptive learning process. But as we move forward, we have to keep in mind the spectrum of folks that we're dealing with out there. We have people that are saying enough is enough. Let's just get back to business like we used to do it. And then you have people that are scared to death to go out in public and to be exposed. So I am really concerned. You know, as you all know, we take an ADM count the first part of October. I'm really worried about what that number looks like. Are parents going to feel comfortable in September to send their kids back to school? Are we going to have to continue with an adaptive learning plan in addition to an on-site plan? And think about the stress that that will put on our teaching staff as we're moving forward. So, you know, I'm sorry that I don't really have solutions. I just have more questions than I have solutions, but I just wanted you all to be aware of some of the thoughts that go through my mind as I think about this on a day in and day out basis.
Senator Rothfuss, you have a question for Janine?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Janine, and maybe somebody from W or maybe Dickie has some comment on this as well, but how are we going to do that count in the fall? Have we talked that through? Has anyone spent any time thinking about what our ADM count is going to look like from a this is how we'll calculate it standpoint if you have all of these hybrid learnings? I guess you just whoever's on the books is going to be counted, but is that a discussion that has happened, Janine?
I don't believe that the discussion has been, that there's closure around the discussion. Perhaps Matt and Dickie could answer the question better than I can.
Dickie, do you have a better opinion?
Sure. Mr. Chairman, through you, Senator Rothfuss. Several weeks ago, we kicked off our working group to discuss the reopening plans. And the working group that's going to be working on operations with schools will definitely make sure that they provide some ideas on that because we haven't come to a conclusion on exactly how that will be done, if it needs to be done differently in the fall.
Gotcha. Thanks.
I guess, Mr. Chair, if I may, is there anything statutorily that needs to change in order to be able to give us the flexibility as we're moving forward on this?
I was just going to ask Matt the same question. Go ahead, Matthew.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the funding model uses primarily average daily membership as its funding mechanism for student counts. And that is an enrollment count across the entire school year. And so a student is dropped from the rolls if they are absent for 10 consecutive days. But it counts students across the course of the 175-day school year or any alternative schedule that's approved. But it's just the enrollment of that student. It's not the attendance of that student. So that's the first piece. That's average daily membership is the enrollment across the entire school year, except for that 10-day required drop day or required drop period. There is an October 1st snapshot for enrollment purposes, and we use that October 1st snapshot in the funding model for the at-risk count for ELL students and free or reduced lunch students. The at-risk count student or the at-risk count is unduplicated, and so it doesn't count those students twice. But there is a second snapshot period in the spring for what we call mobility students. So students in grades 6 through 12 who enroll in a school district or school within the same district and move are considered mobile. And so between that October 1st snapshot and the spring snapshot is that identification period of students enrolling in that district. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I hope I can answer any additional questions.
Did that raise any more questions for anybody? Do you have questions of Janine? All right. Thank you, Janine.
Nice to see you all.
You bet. Nice to see you too. Senator Rothfuss. Oh, you're just waving. Never mind. Okay. Okay, so we're gonna go to Gillian Chapman now. Hi, Gillian. You're still muted. There
Hi,
you go.
thank you. The delay on YouTube is a little bit challenging, so thanks for being patient. Chairman, members of the committee, Gillian Chapman, Superintendent, Teton County. Besides the fear and uncertainty and the lack of ability to plan ahead due to the unexpected nature of a pandemic, I wanted to share the top 10 things that we've learned from COVID in no particular order. Bandwidth is an issue across the state, as you've heard. We did issue hotspots to families without service or who have service, but that service is not strong enough to permit synchronous learning to occur if more than one family or student member was streaming simultaneously. Number two, parents have a very high regard for the work that teachers do. I've had numerous parents joke that they heard their current teacher, i.e. them, is fired moving forward. This speaks to how much parents appreciate the education and the basket of goods their children are receiving. And they have a new respect for how rigorous the basket of goods are in Wyoming. Number three, COVID just may be the disruption needed to do things differently and to think creatively about how we deliver education. Number four, we need a common platform for synchronous and asynchronous learning that's safe from hackers. Canvas is an example of this. Our middle and high school staff were able to make a switch from in-person to the adapted learning plan quickly because we've been using this state-sponsored platform for a long time. Number five, First Lady Gordon's focus on food insecurity is needed. As Trustee Janine Bayteski testified moments ago, we've served over 42,000 meals since we closed. And food insecurity is real, not just for those who qualify for free or reduced meals, but for all families. Number six, families rely on schools for services like food, transportation, education, nursing, counseling, and supervision. This closure has been very hard for working families and has added extreme stress to already stressed out people. Most families cannot fathom a part-time or a half-time day when we reopen for summer school or in the fall. We need to have an approved plan that includes in-person education and the adapted learning plan. Number seven, the balance between technology as a resource and the relationship between the student, the parent, and the school is the key to achievement. I was able to observe classroom instruction virtually and how teachers manage this at all grade levels. What made it work was the relationships. Kids logged into their courses to see their teacher and to see their friends, not necessarily to do math. Number eight, some kids thrived in the adapted learning plan environment and some kids struggled. As a part of our educational program and the basket of goods, we have insisted upon collaboration, teaming, investigation, and productive struggle. These are hard skills to do remotely, and as we look to return to schools, the furniture and the setup in the classroom enables these interactions to take place. Number nine, the number of reports of abuse and neglect are down. It makes me worry about kids in the summer and how we can continue to keep eyes on them, ensure that they are safe. Families depend on the support in schools that include the teacher, the bus driver, the counselor, the food service, the office staff, the principal, the social workers, the nurses. This team makes the difference in ensuring that our kids are safe. Number 10, educators are rock stars. The entire system was flipped in a matter of days, and we flipped it well. You can be proud as the Joint Education Committee and legislators who represent children all across Wyoming. You can be proud of the work that has taken place and how your educators have stepped up to the plate and really, truly hit a home run. With that, I stand for your questions.
Thank you, Gillian. Do you have questions for Gillian? Anybody? Okay, there you go, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gillian, I've heard of kind of particular issues with families with 2 or 3 school-age kids and the ability to do the coordination of their kids and adaptive learning. And in particular, use of computers. And so I'm curious if you've run into that issue, if you've needed to distribute computers in any kind of way, the whole broadband issue, especially when it comes to the need for multiple computers in a home, things like that.
Thank you, Chairman and Representative Connolly. We have run into that, and what we have a one-to-one device for our middle school and high school students. So we were pretty well set with them. We did issue hotspots for families who did not, again, who had poor service. I have service in my house, but I can't run a video. So it's just a broadband issue. So I have a hotspot that I'm running on now so that I can run a video. So we did that. Then for elementary kids, if the student didn't have a device that they could use that's their family owned, then we issued an iPad. Normally we have iPads available on a 3-to-1 basis in our elementary schools. So we did check out those iPads that are normally, just at school. We checked them out for students so they could take them home. And then we also, because we've been using iPads and MacBooks in middle and high school, the kids are pretty familiar with how to do them. However, our network provider that monitors our service, which is K-12 ITC, they established a helpline so that families could call and get help. And then our teachers, one of the things that they have done, they're pretty much available 24/7 to our families with this adapted learning plan. Teachers would adapted their time so that if a parent was working during the day, for example, and couldn't help their student, then the student and the teacher and the parent would hop online at 5 o'clock, at 5:30, at 7. So our educators really took their day. Instead of saying, I'm in school from 8:10 to 3:20, they really changed their schedule so they could meet the needs of kids.
Very good. Further questions for Gillian? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Superintendent, can you clarify for me your statement regarding abuse and neglect? I didn't get that written down very well, and would appreciate that. Thank you.
Sure.
Go ahead, Gillian.
Thank you, Chairman and Senator Landon. We normally schools report, we're mandated reporters. And so if we have a concern, verified or unverified, we're mandated to report it. Through Superintendent Bela, we had a presentation a few weeks ago from the pediatrician and also through the DFS that reports for abuse and neglect were down. And the numbers were inconsistent or lower than they had been in previous times. So when the point of that training and those observations was that when we don't have face-to-face interaction with kids, we're not able to listen to them effectively. We're not able to see, gosh, they seem a little sluggish today. So when we switched to the adapted learning plan, we have to be way more intentional in saying to a student at the end of the session or during the session when the teachers go into breakout rooms with kids, it's a great opportunity to say, Derek, how are you doing? Is everything okay at home? Do you have enough to eat? Are you getting rest? You seem a little sluggish today. So the concern is that when we are in this adapted learning plan, or even in the summer, I worry that we may be missing cases of abuse and neglect. And so that was one of the top 10 things that we've learned is we have to be intentional about reaching out to students and verifying that they're okay. And that may be a home visit. It may be intentionally saying to that student, I'm worried about you. How's everything going at home? Just those kinds of questions. And those questions are made possible through the relationship that's been established. And that could happen with the social worker, the counselor, the nurse, the teacher, the principal. the adapted learn, I think some people believe that the adapted learning plan is cheaper, or it's easier, or we don't need as many staff. It's none of those. We need everybody because we still have these issues. Just because we don't have our faces face to face with kids, we still have these issues and concerns that we're monitoring, and we're monitoring really closely.
Thank you very much. That's helpful. Thank you.
Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gillian, thank you for your testimony. And I agree, like this is an area where we're learning and we have a lot to be worried and concerned about. I do want to switch gears back to a little bit of kind of the technology, because I remember years ago learning that Teton County had purchased laptops, Apple laptops, I think for every high school student, and then iPads through junior high. Were you able to like get a deal through bulk purchase on that kind of equipment? So, and I'm just wondering how some of your devices, those kind of devices last. I'm thinking computer labs, and we have, rotation cycles of how often we buy new computers, but when the students are actually taking them home, I'm guessing there's a little bit more wear and tear. So not that you have to have that at your fingertips, but down the road, I would be curious to know just some of your data on how that's worked and how Teton County has been able to utilize its technology.
Thank you, Chairman and Senator Ellis. I can briefly tell you. So we're on a 4-year cycle. We leased them. We do get a much better price. We lease them, and what's nice about it is that lease stays consistent. So we know exactly how much we're going to spend every year. So it helps with budgeting. At the end of the 4 years, we begin negotiating. We sell the devices back to another company. So we get a chunk of change, and then that we renegotiate a new lease. So our devices are refreshed. They're managed by the school district. And what we find is the students are pretty respectful. We actually have more breakage with our staff, incidentally. However, what we've done, we do offer insurance so people can purchase insurance. It's very affordable if they wish. We repair some things on site if we have the capability. And then we did purchase a very heavy duty case for the MacBooks and for the iPads. And I think that will help with some of the incidental damage. But again, it's worked out really well for our school district. And I'm thankful that we've had that, and our trustees were very forward thinking, because we've been using Canvas since, gosh, probably 8 or 9 years. And then we've been on the MacBook and iPad 1-to-1 for middle and high school for 4 years now. So I guess this is the 5th year. So, I'm grateful that we've had some forward thinking trustees, that we were able to do this financially, and then provide the appropriate training for our students and staff so they can use them properly.
Further questions? All right, thank you, Gillian.
Thank you.
You bet. We'll move to Charles. Charles, are you ready?
I am ready. Can you hear me this time?
You bet. Nice to have you here.
Good afternoon, everybody. Chairman and members of the committee, Charles Oskey, Superintendent, Sheridan County School District number 3. I want to thank everyone on the committee here today for all your work and dedication to the state of Wyoming and education. I also want to send out a special thanks to Karen last night after the meeting yesterday to solve the tech issue so that I can speak here today. So that's a good thing. Representative Northrup, I'll be short and sweet so you can keep up with Senator Coe's challenge of being on time through this process here today. But first of all, I do want to start out by taking a moment to apologize to this committee for kind of some misinformation yesterday with the struggle with online classes for 1920 with Spanish. The struggle necessarily wasn't a state requirement, is kind of, I'll take the full responsibility as my lack of understanding. So I do want to present that to the committee and let you know that we have had some discussions and will continue to move forward with that collaboration. Chairman Northrup, if it's all right, since I didn't get to speak yesterday, I'd like to take a few minutes and talk about K-3 literacy. If it's okay to kind of backtrack a little bit.
A little bit.
Okay, so K-3 literacy is more than K-3, and quality instruction is more than reading. Instruction is K-12. Goals with that are we identify students early, their needs, provide support for them every year. Students develop mentally and physically at different rates. So focusing on growth every year is our priority and not necessarily at grade level. We just strive to have kids at grade level by 3rd grade, but our main focus is growth. To sum up these changes for literacy and what we do, a lot of this is not based around programs, but it's based around class sizes, small groups, one-on-one instruction, and blocks of instructional time. That's a huge thing when we start talking about instruction is time, and sometimes the lack of time. It's additional resources, training, and a passion for kids. It's about individual instructions being developed based on data, PLCs, curriculum, white top blueprints, formative assessments, our assessment system MAP, which just on a side note, we were able to push out remotely through our adaptive learning plan and be successful with that at the end of the year, and basically white top scores. Research-based programs are successful because of the educators, not necessarily because of the program. It's about prioritizing the basket of goods and focusing on what's critical for our students. So when we talk about literacy, the main struggles we have are the number of hours in a day. Dyslexia qualification for special education, I want to remind everybody, is a process and can be a very lengthy process. The comment about guidance documents yesterday, I appreciate that because we're all looking for guidance, but in the educational world and with the educators we have that have a passion for kids, sometimes a guidance document is sometimes received as a requirement just due to the history of Wyoming accountability. So in short, it comes down to the presentation and communication of Wyoming educators who have a passion for kids and what they do daily. Just food for thought. So under our topic of COVID-19, key points, and I heard this said prior to me today, but educators in Wyoming and around this nation have proven that they are superheroes and they did the impossible with the support of parents in the community. They did what they could and they nailed it. I really feel what we've been able to do over the last couple months is a result of a lot of hard work prior to that. But I want to remind the committee that these superhuman people are exhausted. They're stressed about the unknown, the change of the new normal for education. And we always have to remember they have lives and families too. What did we learn in Sheridan County School District number 3? That we learned that Sheridan County School District's collaboration is stronger than ever. We know that we need kids in school. Quality education and results are based on high expectations, quality instruction, but most importantly, relationships. If we have to go back to our adapted learning plans in the future, we need to continue or ask the state for flexibility with our time attendance. I know we touched base on that, our ADM, expectations for teaching and assessing standards and the basket of goods, i.e. accountability and accreditation. We need support with technologies, not just for students, but for staff and the infrastructure. We can put technology in the hands of kids, but that's not going to go very far if our staff and our infrastructure isn't where it needs to be to provide that offline learning. Funding, if Lachelle's still on, I'm totally tickled. So thank you. I'm assuming I will be talking with you and Dickie later about Sheridan 3 and what that funding looks like. But in Sheridan 3, we're prioritizing funding for 2021. So we've had to reestablish what we're going to do in order to meet the new learning platform. We've already eliminated 1 certified and 1 classified staff for next year in order to reduce funding, just knowing that the revenues and the outlook of the state, trying to look at some more online or collaborative pieces with other small school districts. We're looking to mothball the K-6 school in Arvada for 21-22. And we're definitely looking at that collaboration between other districts, small school districts, and local in Sheridan County. In general, teachers' plates are full. Teachers in Sheridan 3 are multi-grade level teachers. They're responsible for developing and providing individual instruction daily. This means teaching all subjects. We're going to continue with our Marzano training. We're going to continue with our PLC work and training. Learning how to teach offline or online or in a hybrid environment has caused another stress level, but I think we can do it well. The new normal for teaching is causing stress. But more importantly, we've touched a little bit on this, is the personal and individual health and safety of not only the teachers, but the students in the community. And then continue to develop curriculum and maps and assessments for all subjects including the addition of computer science. District level work, I think is going to be huge, but you know, the guidance that we get from the state here, hopefully in a couple of weeks with our restart plan, our smart restart plan, K-12 education is going to be different. How we perceive the health and safety of everybody else. We've talked about telehealth here today. And I feel more importantly, the recalibration and funding, it is critical as we move forward with the challenges we face. We need to do this together to make the hard decisions and decide what is critical and what we control. So Mr. Chairman, thanks for the opportunity to present. I'm open for questions at this time.
Questions, Charles? Thank you, Charles. No questions.
All right, thanks. Have a
Okay.
great
Clark, you're up next.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and the committee. Thank you for this opportunity to speak on this topic and how our districts adapted during the last quarter of the school year. First and foremost, I'd like to tip my hat to the educators I'm fortunate enough to work with every single day in my district, and the excuse me, educators throughout the state of Wyoming who worked off scripts, so to speak, for the last quarter of the school year to continue to educate students who were in our district but not in our schools. We learned a lot about being flexible and meeting the individual needs of our students in the last few months. We discovered things we did well and things we could improve. And we will take those lessons forward as we move into reopening this fall and into the subsequent years as well. One thing we already knew but came to the forefront was that our schools serve more than a purpose of education in our communities. Through continuing to serve meals, assisting with technology connectivity, and the overall relationships we build with our families and our students, schools are the hubs of our communities and neighborhoods throughout the state of Wyoming. This is a very important picture to keep in mind as we continue to discuss what schools look like in our state in the 21st century. Schools do serve an academic mission, but there is much more to the role we serve in our communities. I would also like to continue the emphasis of the discussion before the lunch break, supporting the improvement of connectivity throughout the state, especially in our rural areas. While our district was able to serve all of our students with devices, there was still a limited number of students and families who did not have adequate connectivity to utilize those devices. I'm encouraged to know that this is being discussed and ask that it continues to become a strong priority. Thank you again for this opportunity to share the perspective of our schools, and thank you again for your commitment to collectively work together to establish a world-class education for the students in the state of Wyoming. This time I'll stand for questions.
Senator Ellis, you have a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm trying to get my arms around how many students. Do you have numbers you can share with us and what your total population is? That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Our numbers are going to be a little bit less than your home district, but it reflected about 5 to 10% of our students in our district. I did take some notes during that last discussion. Initially, going into the adapted learning plan, we had about 17 families for us that equated to about 27 students, which is about over 10% of our families. Through working with AT&T, we were able to acquire some hotspots to continue on the conversation. And I forget her name right before lunch when she spoke on the collective of the collective cooperative of the internet providers. RT is our provider in town, and they were very helpful in getting that assistance to getting families that were not hooked up to being able to get them hooked up, waiving some fees, and we're very appreciative of that. However, and that discussion already happened, due to economics and the size of our town and the size of our market, we do not have fiber going up to all of our houses. It's in town and we're on the list, but we're lower on the list because we're smaller in size in the market. So that discussion had already taken place. There were about 5 students, which equated to about 3 different families that because they are extremely rural in a rural school district, did not have the opportunity. We ran off packets. We sent them out on buses when we were
delivering meals and those different types of things. But it equated to about 5 to 10% of our 10% at the start. Through collaborative efforts, we were able to narrow that down. So we do want to get to a point, if we're in this situation again, that we want to have everybody connected. But we did. We utilized some of the same strategies that you shared as well, Senator Ellis.
Go ahead, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. From your perspective, I'm looking at, again, my just personal experience. I had a first grader who could do math modules online through a portal and electronically, but it was the same content that was in a notebook that I could print out or even rip out of the book to return. And so I really was trying to see, if there was a method that that was better, that I preferred better, or but at the end of the day, it was the same questions. What is 2 + 3? Does it matter if she types in a 5 on the computer or writes it on a piece of paper and I hand it in? So I'm just curious if you have a thought on kind of this universal connectivity barrier. I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are.
I do. Thank you, Senator Ellis, Mr. Speaker, through Senator Ellis. The content is a portion of it. Also, a portion of it is a first grader not being able to connect with the rest of their classmates and their teacher in a situation. Even though it's virtually, we would prefer to have them face to face and physically together. So there's both the content issue and also doing the best that we can to continue those relationships in a virtual manner. We also, to continue off of Dr. Chapman's testimony a little bit earlier in the importance of telehealth and the necessity for connectivity in that manner, we were able to we contract out for services for our special ed counseling needs through some people that actually live in Gillette. They come over on a daily basis. They were able to establish a telehealth portal that was able to help them meet their IEP needs on connecting with students and those different types of things and be able to make that connection. For the most part, we had success with that. There were a couple families that they were not able to connect with in such a manner. It was very beneficial for them to be able to do that, but we missed that opportunity because one of those families that was not able to effectively connect fell into that realm. So it's a twofold purpose of the academic work that we would do, but also trying to continue to connect with those relationships.
Go ahead, further questions? Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I'd also be curious to know your perspective on just kind of how effective educational delivery is virtually between the grade levels. I think, for an elementary school student, they generally have one teacher all day. And so I think it's unrealistic to expect a teacher in those grade levels to be with a student for 6 hours virtually versus in the higher grade levels where a teacher could record a lesson that they would normally deliver in class for an hour. That seems a lot more reasonable that you could send that video out, let the student kind of watch it at their pace and learn. And so I'm just wondering what you're seeing or what you're hearing from your school. And along those lines of the families that were impacted, I'm guessing it was a mix of both, primary and secondary schools. But if you could maybe put a finer point on who these families were, that would be helpful as far as age and grade.
Yes, Mr. Chairman and Senator Ellis, thank you for asking that question because with that in mind, there is no one key component of what we did that reached everybody. We saw some great successes and we saw some students that were not responsive to education or to the remote learning plan. And we are a district that in the last 4 years, we had adopted more of a personalized learning model. We've been able to, as Dr. Chapman talked about earlier, with our middle and high school students, be able to load our content on Canvas and utilize that learning management system to meet the needs in-house with our students and give them access to our materials 24/7. We were able to, especially at the high school level, move into our adapted learning plan earlier than our adapted learning plans were required.
we moved in, started delivering our remote learning instruction on March 18th, and it was March 16th when we were really getting the message that we were going to have to look at something new. Many of our students were able to do so without blinking. They understood a high degree of student ownership had been built into them. They also viewed the opportunity. They understood that education isn't necessarily time-based, but it's content-based. And so if they could put in that time, they had that opportunity to work ahead because of some of the content. They all did meet regularly with a schedule was built by the high school principal, Linda Crawford. She did an outstanding job of getting that ready for the students. However, as time went on, we were able, there were some students that were engaging in that online platform, but not necessarily submitting as much work to be formatively assessed or summatively assessed that some of the teachers would have preferred. We were able to counter that strategy towards the last three weeks of the school year, and through guidance with the Wyoming Department of Health and the Wyoming Department of Ed, we were able to bring in some of those students for small group face-to-face instruction and build on what we do know is for the majority of our students, it's not going to happen in necessarily a remote virtual environment. Some were able to flourish in that environment, but they still needed to have that relationship and that contact with their teachers. With the elementary teachers, the middle school teachers was kind of a mixed bag as well. They're such at a unique developmental realm. It's hard to get a student that's apathetic when you make personal contact with them on a daily basis to lose that apathy when they're working in a remote learning environment. But we did see some successes that some students who were not distracted were able to flourish. And that was a great success. But so middle school, it varies developmentally. One of the great things, I'll give an example, our kindergarten teacher, she did not do her class meetings through the online platform in one large realm because that's how kindergartners are. And but she met with them one-on-one, and she was fortunate enough because of our size, she could do that in a unique way. So again, as I talked about in my prepared statement, we were able to meet the individual needs of our students. Our size allowed us to have some agility in place, or allowed us to be agile, I should say, to be able to make that happen. So I hope that brings a little bit of clarity to how that works. There's not, I will tell you, there's not one smoking gun answer. There are a multitude of individualized strategies that we were able to use, and small group. We worked large and then funneled it down based on the needs of the students.
Okay, further questions for Clark? Thank you, Clark.
Thank you.
We'll go to Dr. Boyd Brown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I want to thank you for all the time you've put in. I'm heading to my niece's graduation party for our family, so I look a little different today. A couple thank yous that I want to send out there. One, I want to, Boyd Brown, Superintendent Laramie, one, I don't think I said that. A couple thank yous that I want to send out. One is to all of our parents. They really became coaches for all of our students this year as we were working through everything. They did a great job doing that, I think. And then our students. That wasn't easy for all of our students either. As you heard, some students thrived, some really had some problems with it. I would say the biggest problem Laramie County School District number 1 had was connectivity and technology and being able to have devices. Our devices are connected to our school network, and trying to get them to work on a home network does not work very good. So we were not very nimble about being able to get devices out. We do plan to work on a one-to-one initiative next year. We're looking at some of the grant money, some of the CARE money to be able to do that. We think that'll set us up. We are going to have some of those devices that will be connected to wireless, so that if a student does not have connectivity in their house, they'll be able to use that. So we're working on that. We wound up buying quite a few flip phones, or what we would call burner phones, this year from some of our providers. We got those to families. We also got those to some of our teachers and some of our paraprofessionals to work with students. Seemed to work really well. One of the questions was, how many lunches and breakfasts have you served? As of today, we've served over 250,000 breakfasts and lunches in Laramie County School District number 1. So we feel like that's going really well. And again, I want to give a big shout out to our staff members. Our staff stepped up and they did a lot of online professional development for themselves to learn. They were working day and night, learning themselves, and then also trying to teach students. We had a number of staff members also who would make home visits, whether it was for social emotional issues, specifically for delivering packets of information, or just checking to see why students weren't returning work or were not doing work, trying to make sure that they distanced enough as they spoke with them. But overall, I think that our staff tried to do a great job of getting ready to do things. Will we be more prepared if something happens again next time? I think so. I think we're going to have to be very flexible and nimble as we enter the next year. I know that we're going to have some staff or some students that don't want to come back. Their parents won't want them to come back. We're looking at some virtual opportunities for that. So we're going to try to be as prepared as we can and be able to be as nimble as we can as we move into the next year. One of the things that we need a little help with is getting money to be able to purchase the equipment, some of the grant information, and I know that our State Department and the governor's working as fast as they can to get that money out to us, but being able to purchase those so that we have those at the beginning of the year would be a huge help. With that, I'll quit talking and answer questions.
Questions for Dr. Brown? Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. In visiting with folks within Laramie County School District number 1 and doing some of those home visits, again, I just want to assume, we can't assume that it's a broadband issue. In doing the delivery, I understand, some students, because they're at home more, actually spending more time up all night watching video games. And so I don't know, we can always assume it's even if they're not getting their delivery of education online, I don't know that it's necessarily tied to a lack of connectivity. So, as we go forward, if we could just keep monitoring that so that we better understand what some of those barriers are. Unfortunately, I do think that time at home has created opportunities for kids to face other opportunities for distraction. So just a thought. And if you have any thoughts about those kind of challenges, let me know.
Go ahead, Dr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, I don't disagree with you. I know that motivation is an issue even whenever we have our students in the classroom. The one thing I joked about on the radio station the other day is they didn't get a skip day this year because they got to be off from the middle of March on, but it was pretty difficult for them. I do think there are a lot of different issues. Some of them go all the way down to social emotional issues, some of our kids with behavioral issues, some of our students that are extremely medicated really have a difficult time, especially whenever they're isolated. So I think that just trying to work with each one of those individual kids is going to be important. I would agree that we're not going to solve everything with connectivity, but I think that it would help some of our students, would have helped some of our families, because we did not have, I know that there were families out there who mom and dad were working and they had 2 or 3 kids trying to use one device to get everything done. And bless their hearts for doing that. And our teachers tried to be as flexible as they could to be able to work back and forth with them as well. We started out with a lot more people trying to do virtual online learning, and wound up taking out a lot more packets, or parents coming in and picking up a lot more packets towards the end of the year. Some of that was because of the number of devices, the amount of draw and the connectivity that they had. So yeah, we saw an increase in the number of just remote packets that we sent out compared to strictly online learning.
Go ahead, Senator Ellis, another question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just to follow up, in listening to a lot of the superintendent's discussions today, I get the sense that we're assuming that schools will be open in the fall. And, I keep thinking hopes aren't plans. So I'm just wanting a little bit of assurance that the district has been talking about what happens if there's another spike in COVID reported cases. You know, how do we take some of those lessons learned to make sure we do this a better time if we do need to close schools in the future? I hope we don't. And I guess part of that thinking too is, you know, we've acknowledged the strain this has been on teachers, but it has been a tremendous strain on families, particularly where both parents work. And so what kind of conversations are you having about the need to be flexible? And I'll be honest, I had a healthcare worker in my house helping a family member, and she said she works all morning and then teaches her kids at night. And so I'm just wondering if that's been discussed with teachers, is how to help those kind of parents who are really struggling to fit it all in one day.
Dr. Brown?
Absolutely. Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. Senator Ellis, we've been having those discussions. I've set up a meeting with District 2 and our county and state, or probably just our county health official will be there and have some discussions about that and what they think we're going to have based on health wise, that we're probably not going to have a choice. And then we've got the other side of the bucket, the educational part of the bucket. We're working on that. How's it going to look? How is it going to look if we have one school where we have somebody that tests positive and we have to shut that school down, clean it, allow it to open again, knowing that we're going to have some people that are going to say, I'm not going to have my kids back at that school for a while, but doing the best job that we can and being flexible to be able to allow things to go back and forth. I know that it was difficult for a lot of our families. We've tried to provide as much help as we could, either technology-wise, with our help desk there, having paraprofessionals get a hold of them, having help desks at each one of the schools with either paraprofessionals or teachers and office hours. But yeah, it's not something that's very easy, but we're going to do the best that we can, and we will be as flexible as we can again if we have to go and shut down schools or a district.
All righty. Any more comments, questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, there you are. Go ahead, Representative Connolly.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I want to follow up on that. My question is I think for Dickie, and curious about the role of the WDE in terms of schools reopening in the fall and the kind of leadership and direction that the WDE is going to take. Or is everything going to be left to individual level school districts? And honestly, do they know that? And so I am curious about the process over the next, honestly, it should be a couple of weeks for those decisions to be made and then kind of filtered either down or up.
Go ahead, Boyd.
Or maybe for Dickie.
Well, I can start a little bit, Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly. The Wyoming Department of Education has weekly meetings with all the superintendents. They are putting together what they call a smart start for next year. They have a good crew of people that are working in subcommittees and working as a large committee to get some guidelines and things prepared for us. But again, it's going to come down to some of those issues are going to be very local. We've had some of our counties across the state had very few positive cases. Some had a lot higher concentration of cases. So I think some of it's going to come down to that local health official saying, yeah, I think we're at this point now. We just entered phase 2 in Laramie County just this last week. So I think some of it's going to be there, but I'll turn it back over to Dickie too.
Go ahead, Dickie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Superintendent Brown, for that. And following up a little bit more, Representative Connolly, we anticipate getting out a pretty specific guidance document to school districts that we are doing in partnership with the State Department of Health, plus a lot of district leaders, local health officials, school nurses, a good mix of people that all have a say in this process. So hopefully by July 1, we have that to share with districts. And, you know, a lot of it is going to come from the state health department, but then a lot of it is going to get pushed down to the county health officers working with their school district on the different circumstances in each community. And that will really dictate a lot of the opening. In terms of state policies, we'll certainly have to figure out what we're going to do with all the scenarios that Superintendent Brown mentioned. You know, some kids are just, some staff, some students are going to be immune compromised and just flat out can't come back. Others may not want to come back. We may have to have some sort of periodic closure for sanitation or for you know, an outbreak that the county health officer deems to be at a level where the school needs to be shut down again. So a lot of different variables we're hoping to work through with this working group for Smart Start and try to at least raise those questions so that districts know those are the things they need to be thinking about. And then hopefully also providing guidance and best practices related to those major issues. And one thing we're trying to do to be particularly helpful that is different from any guidance document I've seen in other states, and we've read a lot of other sort of reopening plans from other states, is they're organized into discrete topic areas. So how do you do social distancing? How are you going to do transportation? How do you do online learning? What we're going to try to do is take all those discrete topic areas, but organize them into a school day. So we're gonna try to just take it hour by hour. 6 a.m. buses start running. What do you need to do? What do you need to be thinking about? 7 a.m. Staff starts coming into the school. What do you need to do? What do you need to think about? Screening, you know, all these different things. We're just going to try to lay out as much of that as we possibly can in a very helpful format to help with schools going into the fall.
Go ahead, Kathy. I'm sorry, Representative Connolly.
Yes, Mr. Chair, just a quick follow-up, Dickie. Are there any statutory limitations for doing what you are outlining that the superintendent doesn't have the ability to have emergency rules for?
Go ahead, Dickie.
Yeah, great question. And we don't have any specific statutory requests or changes that we may need. One thing that has come up with just the funding scenario is the reimbursements in our model, so transportation and special education, that are based off of actuals and that roll forward on a delayed mechanism. So a school district, presumably if we're substantially reopened next school year, is going to be funded on special education and transportation on actual expenses during this closure time, which presumably there's less transportation going on right now during a closure. And so there are some sort of issues like that that we may need to address with statutory changes, but for the most part, at this point, we've been able to handle everything with using our agency discretion and interpreting statutes or amending rules to address all the concerns.
Okay, good. Anybody else? All right, thank you for the comments. Thank you, Dickie. And we're gonna move to the item number 16 on the agenda, which was 1:15 and about an hour and 20 or an hour and 5 minutes late on our schedule. We're now gonna talk
Chairman?
about. Yes, sir. Go ahead, Goldman.
I just
Chair.
wanted to advise Senator Rothfuss that the next on our agenda is lunch. So if you want to go out and get a little more lunch, you can go do that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll take advantage of that. I'll be back shortly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're now on implementation of Wyoming Works and Community College Bachelor of Applied Science programs, and Dr. Sandy Caldwell and Dr. Ben Moritz will be filling us in. Nice to see you again. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for having us back again today. Again, I am Sandy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Wyoming Community College Commission. And with me is Dr. Ben Moritz, the Deputy Director. We do have a couple of items here for you as an update related to the Bachelors of Applied Science and Wyoming Works. And then subsequently, I believe we have our information that you requested related to hazing. So we'll try to move very quickly for you on this update. And then of course, stand for any questions that you may have, and hopefully we can help you get back on schedule today. I know you've been hearing a lot of things and a lot of challenges and trying to think about pathway forward. I am pleased to get to share some really great information that's been going on in the education realm related to the Bachelors of Applied Science. I think we have shared with you in the past that this is a complicated process, the approval of the Bachelors of Applied Science for the community colleges. It goes through the commission and then ultimately to the Higher Learning Commission. And we, for final approval, we did work very closely with the Higher Learning Commission to establish the emergency rules and the draft regular rules that would provide for this process in the administrative rules. I am pleased to say that the commission yesterday in our meeting in Rock Springs and in the virtual world of Zoom, they did adopt those permanent rules yesterday. So we have those in place. We'll be sending those on for final signature and then be able to implement those. I'm not going to go all the way through what that process looks like in terms of the two-stage authorization to begin the process, approval of the program at the bachelor's level, which allows the colleges then to submit to the Higher Learning Commission, and then a subsequent focused visit that has to occur for the institutions. I am very proud to say that we have 2 colleges who have completed that process. Central Wyoming College was given that approval, I believe in January, with the final notice in March. I believe that was the March Institutional Actions Committee from the Higher Learning Commission approved that. So their degree, their Bachelor's of Applied Science in Organizational Management and Leadership, with 1 track in tribal leadership and another track in business entrepreneurship, will open for the fall of 2020. And we're very excited about that. We also just received a notification in May, and I saw it was published on the Higher Learning Commission website today, that Laramie County Community College, their 2 Bachelors of Applied Science degrees were approved, the Bachelor's in Applied Management and the Bachelor's in Healthcare Administration. So they also will be opening their program for students this fall. So just great progress for those institutions. And I have to give a shout out to Dr. Tyndall, president at Central Wyoming College, and to Dr. Schaefer at Laramie County Community College for just really modeling the great process in actually helping us get these roles appropriate so that they would work. So they did a fantastic job. We also have completed the program approval, which is the second stage for the commission for Northwest College with a Bachelor's in Professional Studies, and for Western Wyoming Community College for a Bachelor's in Business with 2 tracks for that one. The first track being Organizational Management and the second one for Industrial Management. Their focus visits were delayed due to COVID-19. Those were expected to occur in late April and May, and they were postponed. We are waiting for those to be rescheduled. Higher Learning Commission has moved forward with their comprehensive visits, but have taken a slower route on the focus visits in which these would be the case. The next college, the 5th college, is Northern Wyoming Community College District for Sheridan and Gillette in their management and leadership. That has been authorized to proceed, but they have not come back to seek a commission program approval for them to submit to the Higher Learning Commission. Again, this is due to the impacts of COVID-19. There's quite an involved process for the institutions, including their curriculum committees, moving that to their board of trustees, and before coming to us, with the need for the institutions to respond, which they did beautifully, to mitigate the impacts of COVID-19. Northern had to wait on that, on moving that forward. We do expect that to be on our next commission agenda for a regular meeting in October, and they'll get that submitted and back on schedule for the site visit. So once the institutions do get that approval from the Higher Learning Commission, then they do also submit for the ability to provide Title IV funding, otherwise known as the Pell Grant eligibility. And that takes a bit of time, but they do not have to wait until that is completed before they can go ahead and open the program. So just really great kudos to the institutions for the level of work, coordination, and thoughtfulness. I'm very appreciative to the Higher Learning Commission for them working with Wyoming. And I'm very pleased to say that they are planning to use this experience with the state of Wyoming as a model for how to proceed with implementing bachelor's level programs at community colleges. And with that, I think I'm ready to move on to the next topic of Wyoming Works, if I may.
Certainly, go right ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, the Wyoming Works program, as you know, was put into place last year in 2019, and we went to work immediately. We worked very closely with the Wyoming Business Council and the Department of Workforce Services to implement what that process was going to be. We did have a series of emergency rules and progressive emergency rules to move that forward. I'm also pleased to say that those rules were adopted yesterday at the Community College Commission as those final rules. The only change that was made, and I'm very appreciative of that, was the legislation that occurred in the 2020 session that removed the barrier that would not permit prior students to be able to obtain the student grant funds. So the rules that were adopted yesterday do reflect that change from the emergency rules to the final rules. We have 234 students who have received the Wyoming Works grant funding in the 2020 session. You did provide for an additional $1.5 million for those adult students. If you'll recall, this is the first real opportunity for adult learners and to be able to access a higher education with a funding source. So 234 students, there are about 320 programs that are approved. We are also very pleased to say that within this are some of the consortiums. Wyoming Works allowed the first time for consortiums to actually exist for the state, and that allows the colleges to really provide programs, high-cost programs, in a way that they couldn't deliver them in their local area. So it's just a really great opportunity. Programmatic funds were also provided in the initial legislation. The first round of those of that grant process for the programmatic funds was exhausted. We were able to with Central Wyoming College, Eastern Wyoming College, and Northern Community College District. And then the CDL offered among EWC, Northwest and Laramie County. And then a welding program at Casper, and then a production technology at Laramie County. So in the 2020 session, you also, as a legislative body, added $1 million to the programmatic funding so that we could go at that again. We knew there were many more needs, and based on the adoption of the rules yesterday, that application process begins today and will close next Friday. So we will see what other programmatic needs are in place or requesting those funds, and we'll distribute those funds once those programs are identified. I am pleased to say we had one more program authorized yesterday at the commission meeting, and that would be Eastern Wyoming College's gunsmithing program. It was already an approved program, and it is now also a Wyoming Works authorized. So students seeking that, the adult learners who qualify for the funding, will be able to receive a student grant for those programs. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I think I've covered both of these topics. And Dr. Moritz, I don't know if I missed something. I tried to get through it all pretty quickly, and I would be happy to answer any questions unless Dr. Moritz recognizes something I missed.
Questions for Dr. Caldwell? No one? None? Nobody? Well, congratulations on getting some students into Wyoming Works.
Yeah.
Glad to hear it. All right. So we're going to take public comment on that. And as I understand, Joe Schaefer is first up, and then we'll have Kathy Wells.
Yeah, good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Joe Schaefer, I'm the president of Laramie County Community College. I know you're on a tight schedule, and so I'm not going to take a lot of your time. I appreciate Dr. Caldwell's covering of our recent activity around our Bachelor's of Applied Science degree. I'll just tell you that those degree programs have been received incredibly well by our community. And in fact, we barely had notification of our approval out on social media. And we have the phones ringing off the hook, and anticipate we'll have no problem filling those first cohorts. We'll take 30 students, 15 students in each program this fall. Very, very purposefully smaller cohort sizes have been identified. And then starting with our next cohort next fall, we'll ramp that up to 25 students and grow from there. But the response has been incredible. And folks are really looking forward to it. I think our big challenge right now, as you heard this morning from Dr. Hickswa, is really focusing on how and what does fall look like for reopening for us. For our applied baccalaureate degrees, I can tell you that those will be predominantly online. We do hope to have some face-to-face activities early on to establish community within the cohorts, and then move from there. So that works well. Just quickly, Mr. Chairman, on Wyoming Works, and really more the idea of providing an affordable reentry into the workforce through training, I think is something Wyoming not only needs to celebrate with its sort of foresight with Wyoming Works, but more importantly, thinking about how we leverage dollars that we may have available through the CARES Act to find ways to help those folks that have been dislocated because of the pandemic, or perhaps realize the value of a higher education and how important that is to survive these challenges economically and socially. So if there's opportunity for us to think about leveraging those dollars to provide a pathway for adults to re-enter higher education, I would say that's something that's clearly on our mind. But with that, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, happy to answer any questions.
Are there questions for Joe? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, just a quick question. I know it's hard to show the cards face up on the table, but in visiting with several of your colleagues out across the state, there's a lot of concern out there over what it's all going to look like on September 1 on our campuses. Do you share that concern in terms of enrollment, and what are you hearing from your students and your student services division with regard to whether or not the students are coming?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, that's a fantastic question. Very astute observation of the tenor right now. For us, I would say we have a sense of optimism, but also a sense of worry. So our optimism first is really that we fundamentally believe that we're not going to see substantial people take this quote unquote gap year. I know that's a conversation, and there's a lot of pundits that are encouraging people to take a year off. The reality is if we don't see substantial ramp up of economic activity with students, young and traditional and adult, who have been relocated back home because of lockdowns, isolation, and all of those things, they are going to be thinking about their future. Now, are they willing to invest significant dollars to pursue online courses with some major universities outside of the state of Wyoming? I don't think so, but I think community colleges are uniquely positioned to provide instruction that is local, that is affordable, and already has that connection with students. So I hope and we think that enrollment actually will tick up for community colleges. Now, there's two things that are potential hangups there. The first is uncertainty, to your point. What we keep hearing, our admissions rep keep telling us is we're not doing anything till we know what the schools are going to do. So they're watching us and wanting to know, will you have face-to-face? Will your residence halls be open? Will you be doing it all online? And I think a lot of families and a lot of students are really sitting back and watching to see what we do for the fall. The second thing, though, is really understanding what this recession is like as a result of the pandemic. So as you know, Senator Landon, you're well versed in this. Generally, as we enter recessions, unemployment climbs, so does enrollments, especially at community colleges. In many ways, this is an artificially created recession, though maybe not completely for Wyoming, but in the United States, we locked down the economy to keep people safe. If something happens or would occur, the miracle vaccine, the treatment, or we find ways to navigate this and that economy jumps back open in the fall, which we would probably celebrate across the United States, we won't see those enrollments because people will naturally go back to work, I think. And so last thing I would share is just the timing issue. So I know a lot of us and a lot of the folks that are trying to make these decisions and provide that guidance are sitting back and saying, we just don't know. We don't know what the fall is going to look like. We can't give you guidance. We can't give you guidance. What I would say is whether we can or can't, we have to make decisions within the next couple of weeks, because if we are directed to say closed and virtual, then our needs financially for changes to our facilities, for screening, for monitoring, for testing, go away, or at least are substantially reduced. If we're told you need to be open, then we need to be telling parents that, and they want to know, well, how are you going to keep my kids safe? How will you keep me safe? That's going to require a substantial investment for signage, facilities, allowing for social distancing, and so on and so forth. And so I think that's where many of us are at. And without that guidance, my guess is the colleges will continue to plow forward and hope for an opening in the fall, a fall that arguably is going to look different than it ever has, but opening to have people on campus. And that's where LCCC is at.
Thanks for that perspective, President. Appreciate it.
Further questions for Joe? Thank you, Dr. Schaefer. Next up will be Dr. Wells.
Hi, thank you, Chairman, members of the committee. I'm here on behalf of CWC's President, Dr. Tyndall, who is unable to be here today. But I wanted to give you a little bit of information on the result of CWC being approved to offer a Bachelor of Science degree in Organizational Management and Leadership, and just give you a status update on where we are with our full implementation of this program. As Dr. Caldwell mentioned, CWC was the first community college in Wyoming to go through this process. There are lots of points of excitement and pride of being first, and there are lots of points of frustration of being first and going through a process that hasn't been navigated by a community college in this state. I can say that as an institution, we learned a lot about ourselves, we learned a lot about processes, and we learned a lot about collaborations at high levels with large groups of individuals. So it was a wonderful process for us to go through. So we did early in this process identify fall 2020 as our desired opening date. And so if you think about the timeline, it was just about this time last year, we were having those very initial discussions of, should the state do this? We have approval from the legislature to do this. How are we going to go about implementing this? And do we want to be a part of it as a college? And here we are a year later with me before this committee reporting enrollment numbers for the first BAS program students admitted in the state. Because of COVID-19, we had to make incredible shifts in our program marketing plan. Part of the HLC approval process is proving to them that you are ready to market this program to your communities and to your target student groups. Our plan that we presented during our site visit and in all the documentation we had to submit prior to that, didn't turn out to be the actual marketing plan we implemented, because by the time we really got moving forward on marketing this to potential students, COVID happened. And so all the face-to-face activities and on-campus information sessions and community information sessions just didn't happen. But we learned that as people were home, they were spending a lot of time online very quickly. So we launched an incredibly aggressive online electronic social media campaign. So to give you an idea of what that looked like for CWC, with various aspects of social media pieces of information out there, we reached over 130,000 individuals that had some sort of action, either a page share or a like, or I clicked on it action to our social media information. That includes over 3,000 page views on our website of the information regarding our BIS program. By far the most viewed page once it was open to the public, and we started that internet social media campaign, the most viewed page of all the program pages on our website. We did put together some information videos to give students an idea of what these programs are like, how they would navigate through the programs, how they're perhaps different than our traditional programs and in delivery and the way you work through the coursework, and created some information videos. And we've had over 600 views of those videos to date. So I just checked registration numbers this morning. In our planning process, we also had to provide a budget, an overall 5-year budget to the Higher Learning Commission. And in that budget, we had to make some educated guesses as to our enrollments. And we had a target enrollment for year 1 of 25 students. We would be happy if we admitted 25 students to either of our 2 tracks of our program combined. And as of this morning, we have 25 students. There are a mixture of part-time and full-time students. We actually anticipated many more part-time students because these are adult learners who have kids at home and they're working. We anticipated a lot more part-time students, which are challenging, come with their own challenges. But to our pleasant surprise, we have about a 50-50 split of part-time versus full-time. So that wasn't anticipated. However, that tells us how excited adult learners are to jump in and earn a bachelor's degree that they thought they wouldn't be able to earn. So we reached that goal as well. And in addition to those 25 registrations that we have so far, we have approximately 18 additional students who are in various stages of the application process. Either they filled out the application and they're working on the financial aid documents, you know, various steps along that way to getting to the point that you register. And we have approximately 18 students in progress of that timeline. So we are very excited. We've certainly implemented this very quickly, and it was an incredible experience. So that's all I have as far as a status update on our BIS program. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have about CWC's programs, the process, lessons learned, whatever interests the committee.
Well, Dr. Wells, I'm really glad to see the interest in your program. That sounds exceptionally great. Any questions from anybody in the committee? Thank you, Dr. Wells, Dr. Schaefer.
Thank you, I appreciate it.
We're going to move on to school safety and hazing, and Josh Anderson will review the 2020 House Bill 152, and I'm just going to let the committee know that we're going to mix it up just a little bit and have Dr. Sandy Caldwell talk as soon as Josh is done. She wants to get on the road. So take it away, Josh.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson also. This topic came up in part because of this bill that was introduced last year. I'll just run through it real quickly and then take any questions. The bill kind of does 2 things, and excuse me, Mr. Chairman, this is House Bill 152 from 2020. The bill created the crime of hazing and then also imposed some requirements on school districts and post-secondary institutions to communicate with their student organizations about hazing. So just very quickly, Mr. Chairman, subsection A of 62512 defines hazing to be any conduct or method of initiation into a student organization that willfully or recklessly endangers the physical or mental health of any student or other person, and then provides some specific examples of what that might include. And it does include a specific exception that hazing does not include strength conditioning or athletic training related to a bona fide activity. Subsection B then says that a person is guilty of hazing if they commit or plan any act of hazing that results in bodily injury or mental injury. Subsection C says that the crime of hazing is a misdemeanor, except as provided in subsection D. Subsection D makes that a felony if the hazing results in serious bodily injury or death. And then subsection E makes it clear that consent is not a defense to the crime of hazing. And then finally, subsection F is a couple of definitions of terms that are used in that statute. And then the next section created is 21-25-101. This is where it requires the governing body of each institution of secondary education and post-secondary education to issue to every student organization a copy of that criminal statute. And then subsection B requires those organizations to issue a copy of that to each of its members, and then requires those organizations to provide written acknowledgement that they provided that to each of their members, and that the association agrees not to commit any act of hazing or to follow any anti-hazing policies of the institution. With that, I take any questions.
Yep, questions for Josh? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Josh, just real quickly, other than our statutory provisions regarding relationships, is there any other prohibition in law as to consent? Taking you to language on line 14, page 3.
Mr. Chairman, without being your general judiciary staff, there are certainly times when consent is a defense to various criminal acts that would otherwise could be criminal. You can consent at times.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of Josh? Further questions going once? Okay, you're off the hook, Josh. Thank you. With that, we'll go to Dr. Sandy Caldwell. Tell us about hazing in community colleges.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, again, I am Sandy Caldwell, Executive Director of the Community College Commission, and we did provide you with a summary document of the hazing policies at the institutions. All 7 of the community colleges do have specific hazing policies, whether that is in a board policy or in the student handbook and policies. They do provide this information to all of their students, their organizations, and they also have it in their student athletics guidance, which is also required. They have various structures in place to make sure that this information is shared broadly and widely with all of their students. They specifically have that for their students that live in the residence halls, certainly for all of the student organizations, as well as the athletic teams. Associated student government across the institutions also help provide that education and training to students as they come in every semester, but also to make sure that the new students are aware. So what you have provided is a summary document for all 7 of the community colleges. I will tell you that they take this very seriously, and they do have structures in place to take care of student discipline or to do the investigations around hazing. All 7 of the institutions do have their public Clery reports posted so that the public can be informed of any type of activity that's happened in the colleges. You may or may not be aware that the Clery report is a comprehensive crime report at the colleges or post-secondary institutions. And only a portion of that, or even one component of that, would be for hazing. But the institutions do log that very carefully and make sure that they are on top of that. I think in 7 years, there's been 1 incident, and that was handled immediately by the institution and remedied. And that's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
All righty, thank you. At this time, let's go to K-12 policies with Brian Farmer and see where the K-12 is going to be. Brian?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Some of you heard Dr. Schaefer just a moment ago noting that during these pandemic times, people think about their future. So I'm wearing the headset just in case ESPN decides that they need people who like to talk. So I'm practicing for that. And if all else fails, I can ask if you would like fries with that. Mr. Chairman, the Wyoming School Boards Association, at the request of the Legislative Service Office, polled Wyoming school districts in terms of their policies, their practices with regard to hazing. We provided you with a memo. And I think it's important to point out that we began talking about hazing, not just in general, but with a specific definition that Mr. Anderson talked about from House Bill 152. When we asked, we received responses from 38 of the 48 Wyoming school districts. Of course, given the timing of the request, some folks were very busy responding to the pandemic and were not able to provide responses, but we did receive responses from all of our largest districts. Those that we did not receive response from were a mixture of medium and small size districts. All of our districts said that they believe that their current policies prohibit hazing as defined by House Bill 152. And they said that the most common ways of addressing hazing are through either a anti-bullying policy, student handbook conduct policy, and some reported explicitly addressing anti-hazing through their district policy. We did want to point out to you that there is a statute, the Safe School Climate Act at Wyoming Statute 21-4-311 through 315. And that requires already mandates that school districts have policies on bullying. That's important to us because as most of our districts talked about solutions, what should you do with regard to hazing? Most of them thought that if you just added the word hazing to the existing statute of safe school climate, that would add some specificity. But again, most of them feel like it is already prohibited under existing policy. I would just add kind of anecdotally that I think the place where this comes up more frequently are on those trips on a school bus. Kids are at an activity, they come home from an activity and something happens on a school bus. And those instances are violations of policy. Students are disciplined and consequences ensue. Sometimes those are criminal consequences. Sometimes those are just consequences with the district itself that lead to disciplinary action against students. So to be very brief, I just want to let you know that the majority of our school districts feel like they are already addressing hazing, that it is already against their policy, and they feel, generally speaking, no need to do anything further with regard to statutory action.
Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Quick question, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Brian, we worked with your help and the help of several others with regard to timeframes and such. Can you remind me what that legislation did? It seems like we did a little bit better job of helping the districts with the timing of how they can handle situations. Did we not?
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, that is correct. Senator Bebout brought legislation really on the heels of instances that happened in Fremont County. Again, it was a school bus sort of incident, and it was really to kind of bring clarity to the timeline, to the process and the timeline for student discipline in order to allow the district to try to deal with this as an administrative piece. What ended up happening in Fremont County is that students lawyered up pretty quick. And what is supposed to be an administrative process turned into something that was very much like a criminal process as attorneys for those students began making appeals through their disciplinary process or motions even by way of their attorneys. And so this was really intended to try to streamline it and refocus the process as a administrative process, with the reminder that there is the possibility of judicial review once that process becomes final. And in fact, it is separate from any criminal process. That's true whether you're talking at the K-12 level or at the university level. Any disciplinary process by an institution is entirely separate from any criminal action that may be brought against an individual who does bad acts against another person.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate it.
Further questions? So, okay, go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian, the final suggestion you had is everything's fine, but there was a little suggestion before that, well, maybe adding hazing might be good. I guess I want to know your thoughts on that. And before we get to that, I'll tell you, I think I'm a little more concerned now, having heard that every college in the state and every school district in the state does a great job on something all at once as sort of the take-home message, and nothing needs to be improved. That's starting to scare me more, I think, than I was before. So, let's get to the first answer, and then I'll have a follow-up question, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Brian.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, thank you for the question, because I think what you're really perhaps getting at is, how do you stop bad behavior? You can have statute that stops bad behavior. Right now, it is potentially assault. It is potentially battery. It is potentially aggravated assault and battery. It's potentially other crimes against a person to do bad stuff. Those criminal statutes don't necessarily stop bad acts. Districts have policies, college have policies. Those don't necessarily stop bad acts. Education, that might. Education might be a good thing. There are trainings for bullying. That's partly why I say if you add hazing to the anti-bullying statute, then that might make training a part of the answer. So there could be a part of the anti-bullying training that focuses on hazing. That would be something that's a little different, that perhaps has a way of changing behavior. Of course, the other way to potentially change behavior is through the significance of the consequence itself. Does hazing lead to an automatic expulsion from school? Oftentimes I'll say those severe cases that you read about in the paper, that is likely an outcome. But again, it's, if you want to change behavior, what's the right way to change behavior? I don't think policy, having a policy alone, is going to change behavior.
Mr. Chairman, and maybe honestly, I think we have some people that are proponents for this bill that wanted to speak, and we're doing this almost in reverse order. I'd be really curious to hear what Brian thinks of some ideas of coordination between school districts, the colleges, and the university on defining hazing and having a little working group, some collaboration to try and improve the approach in education. This bill, I didn't support the bill last year and don't plan on supporting it. I don't think the felony is the right approach, and just making something more against the law, as you pointed out, isn't necessarily going to do it. But I guess I'd like to hear your thoughts more about, is there more that we can do from the educational coordination standpoint so that we're bringing all of our educational institutions together, everyone's on the same page to some degree, everyone kind of has a common effort, and maybe there's something there that we could do that would be beneficial.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
Senator Rothfuss, I think we are always open to collaboration. If you ask us to work with them, I don't think it needs a statute for that to happen. I think we're open to doing that. Would be happy to do that kind of work. And so I would tell you that we stand ready to collaborate and to do that kind of work without statutory requirement to do so.
Thank you.
So staff, Landon Brown's in the waiting room.
That's a good spot.
Let him in, let him in, let him in, let him in. All right. So let's hear from Ron Laird, and then we'll take more questions. Go ahead, Ron.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate the time of the committee. I did send you a one-page document there. We really are more in a support role for our member schools. As Mr. Farmer just mentioned, each school does have their own policies, and they also enforce those policies.
Chairman, as a point of order, can the speaker, just for people watching, introduce himself?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm Ron Laird. I'm the commissioner of the Wyoming High School Activities Association. Thank you, Senator Ellis. We do have a policy, and it should be in front of you there. And basically that policy is just basically to support our schools, where we definitely talk about should absolutely be no hazing or so-called initiations. I think, you know, in the old school days, initiations were common, especially in a lot of the sporting areas with some of our younger kids. And so that definitely has changed. We continue to, basically what Mr. Farmer was getting at, we really try and provide as many educational resources to our member schools as possible. I have listed some of those there for you under the NFHSlearn.com website. We are a member of the NFHS, it's our national organization, and they put together really, I think, very practical classes. I listed a few there. Some are definitely directly bullying, hazing, and inappropriate behaviors. We've got hazing prevention for students, protecting students from abuse. Along the bullying lines, I think both the social media, we realize that a lot of kids are being bullied on social media. So there's a couple different classes on there, some for just the students and how to deal with that, others for our parents, administrators, and coaches to be able to help with that should it become an issue. One thing we're concerned with right now after the spring is the mental health of our students and what that's going to look like. And so there is a class on that as well, and suicide prevention, even go into band safety. We've had several incidents around the nation with different initiation type things going on in bands. So it isn't just the sports, and then some after school security. We continue anytime we get a new class. My guess is they are probably developing something COVID related right now. They're very good about trying to stay very current with their classes. We get those out with email blasts to all of our administrators throughout the state. We do have our states divided into 4 districts. We meet with those districts with our member schools 4 times a year. And so we, again, keep this in front of them during those district meetings as reminders of what is available to them. And several of our schools really do utilize a lot of these courses. So I would entertain any questions.
Questions for Ron Laird? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. This is not a question, but I just want to send a shout out to the commissioner. It's been about 10 years ago, Commissioner Laird, that you and I worked together on something. And I just want to really tip my Stetson to you. We were among the first states to really get out in front of the head injury situation. And most of that was because of Commissioner Laird and his crew. And then we were able to work down in Cheyenne together to pass legislation. And to this day, I still get phone calls from people like the New York Times. And so I just wanted to recognize that work. It's been we go back up the river a little ways, Mr. Chairman, but it's good to see Commissioner Laird here.
Thank you, Senator Lyman.
Yes, you don't go quite as far as I do. I went long ways back, so.
That's true.
Okay. Any other questions or thoughts? With that, we'll turn to the University of Wyoming and talk about policies there. Eric Kahn and Kimberly Chestnut.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Dr. Kimberly Chestnut. I'm the Vice President for Student Affairs at the University of Wyoming. And we certainly appreciate the opportunity to have this conversation and that the legislature is interested in addressing hazing. So this has been an area of interest for the university. Often the measure is advanced by our students. So we have communities within our student government, ASUW, and those within our fraternity, sorority life who have really been advocating for greater commitment to a shared understanding and definition of hazing across the state. And so over the past few years, they have reached out to some of our legislatures about this area. So pleased to see that it got some attention this last year and moving forward. In regards to Senator Rothfuss's comment earlier about sentiments that all is well, I think that that's a fair concern in that in particular, 44 states nationally have hazing laws. 31 of those have it as a misdemeanor and 13 as a felony. So I'm not saying that the University of Wyoming is necessarily advocating for that level, but what we are saying is that some work needs to be done in this area here. And that I'll just share a little bit of data that helps guide that and then where we are as an institution. So I referenced some recent research. It was a 2019 study on student hazing experiences, attitudes, and perceptions. And this was a relatively good size study. It was 5,000 student respondents. And I will note that most of the schools who responded were schools who had a commitment to hazing prevention, right? So perhaps they were a little progressive to start. But 26%, so that's 1,300 students of the 5,000 said, I have experienced hazing. And this is at the collegiate level. We didn't in this study assess who had maybe experienced hazing in their K through 12 experience. But that's an unsettling number of students. And so one is the prevalence. Number two, this study also was really helpful in articulating that essentially the support for hazing is not just the student groups themselves, right? So a peer-to-peer experience, but that 40% of the students in this study said my coach or my advisor knew that it had happened. And beyond that, 29% of the students said that person was there. They were in attendance. And so when we're looking at who's around and who's maybe facilitating this, we have students, we have coaches and advisors, and we have alums. So the issue is pervasive in that regard. And so the University of Wyoming is currently working from our definition, most recently updated in May of 2016, started with our presidential directive 8-1988. And it has a similar definition to the one presented in House Bill 152. We have one primary area that could be modified. National hazing organizations really talk about how coercion and consent are challenging. And so this House bill talks about that. And there's been a brief conversation already today, but that it doesn't just happen at initiation. Hazing can happen when they want a student to be retained. It can happen when they're forced to do hazing on other students. So that the duration of the experience is not just at the beginning, but perhaps throughout. So those are some of the primary areas that I really wanted to share. Eric Kale, my colleague, can really speak in detail to more of the actual groups on our campus and really can provide some insight about the negative impacts that hazing has on our students. So Mr. Chairman, maybe I'll pause there, and if there's no questions for me, we'll move to Eric Kale.
Questions for Dr. Chestnut? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Thank you. Just real quickly, Ms. Chestnut, there are some really some changes coming down from on high in the Title IX area. And I wonder if you have had time to review some of that. In particular, I wondered, having sat in a Dean of Students office myself, I wondered if what this whole issue of you have to almost find an attorney for a student. In other words, no matter what, you have to begin the whole process in a completely different way, do you not?
Go ahead,
Yes,
Dr.
so, yeah, Mr. Chairman, Senator Landon, I will acknowledge that the modifications to Title IX regulations is significant, and that at the University of Wyoming, we are anticipating the biggest changes being on our employment side, that much of our student conduct process currently aligns with the modifications that perhaps other institutions don't currently have in place. When it comes to resourcing and representation of students, you're right, there is guidance around saying that students need to have equal representation. The institution should provide that, and that representation should be in alignment with the student's position. So I think this is in response to previous guidelines that have said all complainants, right, all victims / complainants need to have support, and that there was perhaps a disproportionate amount of attention to them and maybe not enough to our respondents. And so the modifications work to align that. But you're right in saying perhaps they've elevated it unnecessarily in form of representation. And so baseline is you have to have equal support and opportunity. And perhaps that means it does not have to be an attorney. And that we could promise as an institution, we will give equitable support on both sides, our complainant and our respondent, but perhaps it's not at the legal level. And if a student self-selects to get an attorney, that could be in addition to the support the university provides. Hopefully that answers the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you, Doctor. Anybody else have any questions for Dr.? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Chestnut, I just want to say I appreciate really bringing it from the student's perspective, and that's something that I'd be curious to hear from the colleges and the K-12 students as well, whether they feel that hazing is a problem, because having policy on the books doesn't necessarily mean it's not a problem, and that was something Mr. Farmer said. You could still have a problem. You have to sort out ways to address the problem, and just punishments aren't necessarily enough. Do you feel that it would be useful to have a uniform definition throughout the state, from the K-12 to the colleges to the university? Would that be something that would be of benefit, having that statutory? What can we do that is going to move this forward and make it easier to address the student needs?
Go ahead, Dr. Chestnut.
Yes. Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, yes, I think a uniform definition would be an incredible next step. Our students learning from kindergarten up through college about expectations of behavior and having that be consistent would be paramount, that they don't have to try to refigure out what that means. And so really helping to inform behavior early could be preventative at the collegiate level. Right? I already understood this was or was not acceptable, and I already understood there were consequences. I would say in addition to a uniform definition would be greater capacity for reporting. And we know that a lot of students want an anonymous opportunity to do that, which is available at the institution. It sure does make it more complicated to do an appropriate investigation, but greater opportunity for reporting across the state, right? So all levels of education would also be helpful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Eric Collop, do you have a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the committee for allowing me to offer a few remarks. As VP Chestnut said, my name is Eric Kale. I'm one of our associate directors for our Center for Student Involvement and Leadership. The relevant areas though within my purview here at the university includes the fraternity and sorority community, as well as our student organization community. I'm also the chair of our hazing prevention task force. So the few brief remarks that I have kind of focus around some national and university, both national and university data, as well as just a few observations from my 10 or so years in this line of work. 2.5 of those years have been here at the university. Let's start off with when students come to the university, we want them to get involved and engaged. We know students are usually more successful when they are involved. Successful meaning greater retention rates, quicker graduation rates, et cetera. One of the key ways for them to get involved is by getting involved in the nearly 300 student organizations that we have here at the university. Of those 300 groups, we have 16 social fraternities and sororities and 22 club sports. Our club sports are different than the athletics programs that you might see on TV. Those are more departmental. Other departmental, if you will, involvement opportunities would include like the ROTC programs and marching bands. Only a handful of the groups that fall in that student organization umbrella have a national reporting body that also provides additional resources, support, and education to prevent hazing behaviors from happening. And when I say only a handful, like I said, over about 300 student organizations, there's only about 20 in total that have some additional support and national policies that dictate behaviors in addition to what the campus already provides through our code of conduct. Obviously, for us as an institution, the student safety is paramount. Students can't be successful in the classroom and through their involvement if they have some of these other negative implications. And what I mean by that is, in a 2015 study of college athletes indicated that 74% of victims of hazing reported some form of negative consequence as a result of being harmed. And that range, those consequences range from physical consequences such as injury, burns, vomiting, sleep deprivation, to more of the invisible impacts such as anxiety, lack of self-worth, lack or less self-confidence, depression. All of those are some factors and impacts that hazing can have. And I would also kind of offer a distinction between hazing and bullying. While that difference is subtle, hazing is traditionally seen as an inclusionary practice and perpetuated by an organization. And again, somebody seeks to be involved. And so in order to be involved or remain involved, you have to do X, Y, and Z. That is usually embarrassing, humiliating, demeaning, something to that effect. The difference, I would say, with bullying in its basic form is exclusionary. No, you can't do this. And so that, like I said, it's a subtle factor, but bullying more excludes a target, whereas hazing is about, yeah, you can be a part of us if you do X, Y, and Z to prove yourself. So that's just a subtle difference that I wanted to note. And as I start to wrap up, it was about 2.5 years ago that I started working with our fraternity men and sorority women, as well as our student athletes with club sport, and started to infuse hazing prevention education into the existing or even new programs in that case. And it was through some of those conversations that the students, I think, began to realize and see that hazing is beyond just those news stories that you might read in the paper or see on a movie that tend to be very severe and egregious physical acts. They were missing the whole psychological and mental component that is also at play when it comes to hazing behaviors. And so that type of perspective is in line with other trends. There was it's a little dated, but there's a 2008 nationwide study conducted by the University of Maine that indicated that 47% of college students experience hazing in high school. And so they're bringing those experiences, those learned experiences with them then to college. And it's our hope that they learn and know better and are conditioned to not put those on. But there's nothing to say that they're not actually doing that as they get involved in other organizations. my personal opinion is, and not that of the institution, but my personal opinion is that a consistent understanding of what hazing is, K-12 through the university level, would allow for a little bit for more cohesive understanding of hazing behaviors, and then also aid in a greater approach to prevention efforts. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Eric. Anybody got a question for Eric? Yes, Representative Connolly.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Eric and Dr. Chestnut. I'm curious if you could share with the committee any examples, and they can be general if you don't want to get into the specifics of naming kind of people or organizations at UW, where there have been experiences of hazing, and then the kind of the university's response with existing statutes. And then I'm going to ask a follow-up regarding the specific bill.
Go ahead, Dr. Chestnut.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Conley. So there have been instances of hazing on our campus, and Eric was mindful to note that there's a variety of groups where those actions happen: club sports, registered student organizations, Greek life. And so to your point, I won't specify where, but the issue gets brought to the Dean of Students office. As needed, we work in tandem with University of Wyoming Police Department, conduct an investigation, and deem responsible outcomes or reasonable outcomes. So what I could offer is that that might mean that they are suspended for a period of time. They would lose funding for a period of time. They might be put on probation. And depending on the organization, there could be additional components of sanctioning that would be coming from a national organization. So we do our own university operations, but would be mindful to connect with national organizations where available so that we can work in tandem in addressing those issues and concerns. So hopefully that answers your question, Mr. Chairman.
Follow up, go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, so just a follow-up and then a different question. So you gave us statistics that are based on a national survey, and the numbers are really high. And I'm curious if you believe that those numbers are comparable to what we see here in Wyoming.
Good, Doctor.
Great, Mr. Chairman, Representative Connolly. So yes, we do anticipate that our statistics here at University of Wyoming are comparable to national data. That has been the case for us when we're doing campus climate surveys of other content areas. So while we don't have comprehensive data about hazing at UW at this time, when we look at our statistics around sexual misconduct, we parallel national data closely. When we look at mental health concerns and suicide attempts and completions, we parallel, if not exceed, in some of those areas. So it would not be my expectation that we would be lower in that regard. And Eric, I would invite if you wanted to add anything. Okay.
Eric?
Nothing further to add. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, my different question is about the draft legislation that's before us. And I'm curious about your thoughts regarding it, and also that you suggested a K through 12 as well as a university. And I look at this, and this is, again, it's a bill that ends up with a penalty of a felony, where to me, that is incredibly severe. The ramifications of a felony on a person for life last for life, right? Your ability to get a job, your ability to get a credential, your ability to vote are all implicated with a felony. And also, children will not be charged with a felony. They'll be charged with, as a delinquency, for example, not as a felon. And so I'm curious about your thoughts regarding this particular draft bill to address the issue.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Sure. So, Mr. Chairman, I would tell you the University of Wyoming does not have a position on House Bill 152. Our initial efforts in attending to hazing were more so about a common and shared definition. And so when I mention K through 12, I'm really talking about attending to some of those hazing concerns. Eric reviewed some data, right, that above 40% are experiencing it in high school. So that our primary right, our initial and primary interest would be in having a shared definition, knowing that we're addressing it comprehensively and increasing opportunities for reporting. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Connolly, any more?
Second.
Senator Hutchins, did you have a question? Okay. With that, we're going to go to the University of Wyoming ASUW fraternity and sororities. And with that,
Mr. Chairman, I believe Senator Ellis had a question.
I didn't see it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, as I'm reading this definition, and again, just kind of echoing the concerns about making certain things criminal, I know there's this qualifier that talks about acts that are willful or reckless and that endanger the physical or mental health of any student. But then I'm looking at like the forced consumption of any food. And, you know, I was in a sorority and years ago, you know, we used to eat silly things just to make each other laugh. And it wasn't, you know, I guess in today's world, probably not okay, but I just worry about creating felonies over, you know, daring you to eat a spoonful of ranch dressing with a Splenda packet on top or something silly like that. So I'm just kind of curious what that's getting at nationally or what you're hearing is a problem.
Thanks, Matt. Dr.
No,
Chestnut.
Mr. Chairman, I never would endorse eating ranch dressing with a Splenda packet or something along those lines.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis. I will share that there's an investigation, right? There's a due process when it comes to this. And so it could be explained that were such an incident to have occurred, that perhaps it was an element of a dare as opposed to a required ritual that would qualify as hazing. So our service in ensuring that there is due process and an investigation is always active. So I think that could perhaps reduce the concern that we would unnecessarily be challenging instances of kind of lighthearted camaraderie versus truly incidents that endanger somebody's physical or mental health. And as I said before, really the university doesn't have a position currently, but perhaps before we ever would make their levels of punishment, we would better understand what we were all saying hazing is. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, further questions? Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to note that during the last interim towards the session, University of Wyoming students, Eric, the Greek Life and ASUW reached out to me and said that they were interested in this topic and interested in trying to do exactly what Dr. Chestnut said, come up with a more uniform definition, try and get some commonality and build towards a better understanding and reporting. And so I suggested that we work with the education committee and come back and try and do it as an interim for the general session, which is what we're doing at this point in time. This bill draft had its own life, and it had nothing to do with that process. This bill draft exists fully independent from that, and was not a result of any of those internal discussions by the folks at the university that were interested in it. So even though Dr. Chestnut's saying, no position on this, I just want to be clear that it's a draft we took a look at because it had the same word in it last session. And I think maybe the hazing definition is a good start for a definition, but maybe not the conclusion. But I just want the committee to know that we don't need to in any way be married to this, because there's nobody here, to my knowledge, that's even advocating for it, unless somebody wants to step up and advocate for it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Anybody else? Okay. For ASUW and fraternity sorority life, there we go. Riley, I'm going to kill this. Talamontes.
Yeah,
Both?
you got it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Riley Talamontes. I'm the president of the Associated Students at the University of Wyoming, which is our student government. I'm also here on behalf of the members of the College Panhellenic Council and the Interfraternity Council, which are two representative bodies that represent the frat and sorority life community at UW. So recently, as we've been discussing the House Bill 10152, the bill that we've been talking about for quite some time failed an introduction during the 2020 general session. And while we over at ASUW and in the FSL community applaud the attempt at a bill strengthening hazing prevention, these three groups that we have on campus believe that rather than punishing students, a definition of hazing coming from the state legislature would help the university, the Wyoming High School Activities Association, school districts, and students uniformly being able to identify, prevent, and report hazing. And there are three primary reasons that our three groups on the UW campus would really like to see a uniform definition. The first one is uniformity. Definitions across the state are wildly inconsistent, which can cause some issues when individuals may want to seek legal action or figure out how exactly they're going to deal with their child who has been in a hazing incident. For instance, the Wyoming High School Activities Association definition of hazing is only 20 words long, whereas the UW Student Codes of Conduct's definition is 119 words long. Brian Farmer, previous speaker, mentioned that they have policies in various schools that attempt to address hazing under a bullying policy. And I think there is a real stark difference between what bullying is and what hazing is, where bullying excludes the target from a group, whereas hazing is more of a ritual and a process imposed on a person who wants to be a part of that group. Bullies oftentimes act alone, but hazing usually involves a group, a team, or an organization. And these are kind of the reasons why we think it's important to have a more unified definition, so students from their very early sense of learning in elementary school can be able to identify those differences in bullying and hazing when they are continuing their education up until college. So we think a more unified definition can help create a safer culture in our schools and in our activities that students participate in that carries forward from early elementary education all the way to college. The second reason that we would really like to see a more uniform definition is that we think we can really get in front of these issues and help lay a base and foundation for further work that can be done on hazing. Hazing has not been an issue at the University of Wyoming, but it has been occurring more and more in Wyoming high schools. And we really want to emphasize the importance of incorporating a clear definition and education and prevention measures, because this can help prevent hazing from becoming a more serious issue in the state and at our university. It's a lot better to get in front of the issue rather than having to wait and be reactive on it. And the third reason why we would really like to have a more uniform definition in the bill that you all create for the next general session is emphasizing education rather than punishment. Having a bill that emphasizes education rather than punishment is incredibly important to us. We don't think it's necessary to have a punishment in place, because when most hazing incidents do occur, there is already a law that is codified to kind of deal with the situation that had happened at hand. For instance, some of the worst consequences of hazing already are covered in crimes such as assault, harassment, etc. And I think some of the points that Representative Connolly had mentioned previously about the ramifications that a felony has on someone's life is really a large reason why we oppose that creation of that bill in the general session in 2020. But furthermore, the states that do have laws in place regarding hazing are very particular to those reasons, and there's kind of reasons why they would have punishments. States such as Pennsylvania and Louisiana have more severe penalties for hazing due to current events that had happened on their campus that resulted in someone being injured or a death because of someone who was being hazed. So additionally, we would like to have this bill being emphasized on education at an early age about what hazing is and the dangerous situations it can really put students in if they are participating in it. But not only that, kind of understanding what hazing looks like at a young age is a really great way for a student to identify acts of hazing that occur so that they can really not be a part of those situations when it comes to them. But ultimately, ASUW, IFC, and CPH, our FSL councils, really urge the committee to focus on writing a bill that does the three following things. The first one is emphasizing a uniform definition. So a clear definition of hazing we think should include related to a membership in a group and intentionally exploits power dynamics. Second is the potential for physical, mental, or emotional harm in the act. Third is a willingness to participate does not absolve any party. And the second focus we would really like to see in this bill would be adding requirements for education and prevention in schools and other activity organizations that happen across Wyoming, as well as evaluate current practices for education and prevention that are already happening now. And finally, we recommend that the committee evaluate the laws of all the other 44 states that have anti-hazing laws when considering such laws and how they would work in Wyoming. But I will answer any questions if you all have any for me.
Is there questions for Riley? Questions from anybody from University of Wyoming? All right, then let's move to public comment. I have one person for public comment, and that is Brian Farmer. Brian, it's all yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Just wanted to be clear that when we presented information, the information we presented was at the request of the Legislative Service Office to give you a picture of what's happening now with K-12 policies. Just a couple of comments with regard to things that were mentioned by some of the previous speakers. Dr. Chestnut talked about the opportunity for anonymous reporting, and I think it's important for you to remember that at the K-12 level, there is Safe to Tell, which is the opportunity for individuals to report anonymously. So that does exist at K-12. And there is that difference between K-12 and UW. I also think it's important to keep in mind other behaviors, developmental differences between college students, high school students. How is behavior more likely to manifest? So the questions that we asked our superintendents was whether or not policy is needed. And they felt that given the definition that existed in House Bill 152, that their current policies prohibited that behavior. Further, when we asked our legal counsel to review it, Tracy Copenhaver, many of you know Tracy. Tracy's the one that defends a lot of Wyoming school districts when they end up getting sued by somebody for this. Tracy felt that Wyoming policy already prohibits that conduct. That being said, we are happy to work with the university level folks, the community college folks on a common response. If you think that policy is the route to solve that, then we're happy to work with those folks. We've not taken a position at this time with regard to the bill, whether that's something good or bad. We did have concerns about the felony provision in 152. But what we did was simply try to inform you about what did folks think about that definition in 152, and did their current policy prohibit that type of conduct? It does in their mind, but if there is a desire to do something more, and if it's beyond defining a bad behavior in a policy, we're certainly interested in working with that as well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Questions of Brian? Thank you. With that, I have 3:40, and I can't believe it, but that makes us 5 minutes ahead of schedule, Chairman Coe. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll be back at 3:50. Oh, wait.
Mr. Chairman, I was going to say that it took you quite a while to get back on schedule, though. It never takes me that long.
I know. Senator Rothfuss, you had a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I was going to make a motion on this topic, but we can do that after the break if you'd prefer.
Yep, that's what I was going to ask for.
Done. All right, after the break. Thanks.
Chairman Coe, I'm sure I got enough House members. How about the Senate?
I don't know. I got Senator Hutchings and
Yep, Rothfuss, so you're good.
Rothfuss. We got 3 out of 5. That's pretty good for us.
Good for you, yeah. All right. So we left off at our leaving some direction on school hazing. And Senator Rothfuss, you have some time now to kind of think about some language, so go ahead.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I was thinking maybe of putting together a working group, and that would be my motion, a small working group to work with the university, the colleges, K-12 organizations, including the Wyoming High School Athletics Association, the Wyoming School Board Association, in other words, the stakeholders, get them together and work with LSO staff on drafting legislation for us to consider that would address a uniform definition for hazing in the state of Wyoming, a more comprehensive approach and requirements for education related to hazing, as well as any additional reporting requirements that might be in place. But I certainly do recognize that Safe to Tell addresses that at the K-12 level very well. So that's my motion.
Second.
I think it's a good idea. Any other discussion? Go ahead. Representative Flintner's got her hand up.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess I have a question for the committee. Is it necessary that we draft legislation to get that definition, or can't all of our educational cooperatives in the state get together to help to clearly define that within their own ranks? Just let me know why it's necessary for legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, there you go.
I'd amend the motion to not necessarily require they come back with legislation, but basically talk that through and make the decision based on what Representative Flintner just said, which is a very good point.
Second, okay with that? He's good. Any other comments? All those in favor signify by raising your hand. That looks pretty unanimous. There we go. There we go.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, that passed.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else on this section? That was my concern, was to get a better definition. So it looks like we're headed down that road. All right, we're on school safety threat assessment number 19, and we're going to review of the 2020 Senate File 79, School Safety and Security. Josh Anderson, you're up.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, just to avoid confusion, I guess there's 2 versions of this bill in your materials. There's the version that was introduced, and then the engrossed version as it passed the Senate. They're both very short. I'll walk through both of them real quickly so you can see how the bill changed. And then stand for any questions. So we'll start with the introduced version, which is the one that does not have the word engrossed at the top right corner. So what this bill did, Mr. Chairman, is required each school district to adopt a safety and security policy, including threat assessment procedures, and then required the superintendent of each district to implement that policy, and allowed the district's policies to remain confidential, and allowed them to discuss those policies in executive session. Then going into section 2, it required the state superintendent to develop resources related to school safety, including a model school safety and security framework with model threat assessment procedures, and required that framework to be developed in consultation with the districts and the Office of Homeland Security, and also to include a system to provide technical assistance to school districts in their development of those initiatives and threat assessment procedures. Going over to the engrossed version of the bill, as it passed the Senate. The first section is the same, requiring the school district board to adopt those safety and security policies and threat assessment procedures, and again, allowing them to be confidential and done in executive session. But the bill removed the requirement of the state superintendent to adopt a model framework, and then it added the to the duties and powers of the state fire marshal, that the fire marshal shall not prohibit the use of a door securement device pursuant to a school safety and security policy, and that the state fire marshal could adopt rules related to their use and limiting those to during an active threat or during a safety drill.
All right, thanks, Josh. Any questions, Josh, on the two bills? All right, thank you, Josh. So you've heard the basic explanation of it. Let's go right to the discussion of the threat assessment with Dickie Shaner and Catherine Palmer from WDE. Go ahead, Dickie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, committee members, Dickie Shaner and Kat Palmer with the Department of Education. I just briefly want to recap how we got to where we are today, because I think that kind of explains a lot of the story. So 2 legislative sessions ago, there was a school safety and security bill that was supported by the governor and the superintendent that ultimately did not cross the finish line. And I think I would describe sort of the prevailing sentiment of the opposition to be that it was just too much. It was almost like an omnibus school safety bill. It had a lot of different components, was a lot to digest. And so after that session, we really went back to the drawing board and tried to drill down and be more specific. What is the most critical thing we need to be doing from a state policy perspective related to school safety and security? And so in conversations with experts on this issue, it was determined that really this notion of a threat assessment protocol is at the heart of school safety and security. And so a piece of legislation was sort of resurrected again with the singular focus on threat assessment protocol this last session. With that in mind, it, of course, did not again cross the finish line. And so I think we're here today to just try to understand, you know, what it is, if anything, that we need to do as education policy leaders in the state to help implement best practices around school safety and security, and certainly national experts, FBI, Secret Service, all are proponents of this threat assessment protocol. And so that is kind of what we believe is important. And then also, Mr. Chairman, what I'd like to do, Ms. Palmer is on our accreditation team, but she's also taken on the responsibility of being our school safety expert within our agency, and really tried to train herself and become an expert on the topic. And I'd like her to just briefly touch on the grant that she is working with Region 5 BOCES on receiving for our state related to threat assessments.
Go ahead, Kat.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Dickie, for the introduction. So like Dickie mentioned, I am on the accreditation team, Kat Palmer. I am working with Region 5 BOCES to apply for a Bureau of Justice Assistance Stop School Violence Program grant. If we're awarded the grant, we will train and deploy regional threat assessment coaches who will then lead the development of threat assessment teams in all 48 districts. We hope that this project will help strengthen relationships between local law enforcement officers, educators, students, and community mental health and wellness organizations. Part of our reason for starting this work with Region 5 BOCES, we've seen different renditions of the school safety bill, and what Josh just read, that one of the requirements would be some sort of model framework and technical assistance from the state superintendent. So in addition to possible legislation, there's a lot of data out there that says that this work needs to be done. The Wyoming Medical Society reports that mental health issues are rising in Wyoming. FBI, Secret Service, Department of Homeland Security all report that there's a direct correlation between mental health and school violence. And the CDC reports that Wyoming has the 3rd highest suicide rate in the country, which for me personally, right, that's alarming. We know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, when you look at that triangle, that bottom level, basic need for a human to reach their full potential is this idea of having a safe and secure environment. So I'm just stressing that in addition to possible legislation, there are a lot of reasons why this work is very important. And so we hope that by implementing this comprehensive system, students will receive the supports and interventions that they need, and that will help decrease any chance of violence to themselves or to others. We have a lot of support around the state. Like I said, Region 5 BOCES has been a major partner in this grant process, but we've received letters of support from many Wyoming organizations. The Wyoming Association of Sheriffs and Chiefs of Police, Wyoming School Resource Officers Association, Safe to Tell Wyoming, Wyoming Association of School Administrators, Wyoming Association of Special Education Administrators, Wyoming School Counselors Association, Volunteers for Partner Alliance for Safer Schools, and we've also received support letters from educators and just mental health professionals in general in Wyoming. We hope to hear back by the end of September if we receive the grant funds. And if we do receive the award, we'll start our work in October.
Good. So you have a grant that you're working on, and you've asked us to write a letter of support for it. I was going to ask the committee if they think that's a good idea, if you guys are willing to put the education committee's name on that letter. Ooh, yes, I got a thumbs up on 1, thumbs up on 2, 3, 4, 5. Yep, okay.
Awesome.
Thank you.
So we'll get that letter out, Vicki and Kat.
Very happy to hear. I'll be submitting that in a few days. So
we'll get on.
So thank you very much.
All right. There's a couple. Anybody have any questions or comments on this section? Senator Ellis? Oh, I got Senator Landon. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did have a couple of questions of maybe Kat, perhaps Dickie, you can help with this. I'm just curious. I have a really great district here, and I think they're way out in front and doing well. And but I suspect that maybe not all districts are that far along on this front. Can you give us some perspective as to where we are with our 48 districts? Do they all have threat assessments?
Kat or Dickie?
Kat, do you want to maybe just touch on your work with accreditation and looking at the different plans across the state?
Yes, so Mr. Chairman, so as part of the accreditation process, districts are required to have crisis management plans. What's not defined though is what should be within those crisis management plans. But we've had conversations, and I will say that this is an area that even if we do not receive the grant funds, this would be my next step, is to make sure that we get clear and accurate data for where our districts really are in this process. We know from conversations that some districts, like you were mentioning, they have a model protocol already in place. They have their relationships, but there's also some districts out there that they're starting from the ground. And so hopefully with this grant, and I already know that one of the first steps will be that data piece. Our work will be completely driven by what are the needs of the state, because each district's going to need some different level of support. And so just know that whether we get the grant or not, we will get clear and accurate data about what kind of procedures are already in place at the district level.
So I guess I'll ask you, Kat, how many districts out there do not have a plan? It's kind of shocking to me to hear that, because the ones up here in the Bighorn Basin are pretty proactive on that kind of thing. So I'm just wondering what districts do not. I mean, I don't need to know them by name, but how many of them?
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a follow-up question, just a clarification?
Sure.
When you're saying a plan, what kind of plan are you asking about?
Like a threat assessment plan.
Okay, so that's the data that I'm saying that we need to collect. So at the beginning of this project, that will be one of the first steps. And if we don't get the grant funds, our yearly safety and security survey will be revised to make sure that it's very clear that one part of our survey is talking about the hardening measures, and the other part will be very, very explicit and ask questions about what do you have in place? Do you have a team? Does the team talk about threat assessment interventions? So that'll be those kind of data we'll start collecting in the fall. So I can't answer that right now, but I can always come back and give you an update.
That sounds great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My understanding, when I was trying to understand what was out there, what some districts have in place versus what some districts kind of don't. I recall, I think anecdotally, someone at the department said there's some districts that have a crisis management plan, but they literally haven't been updated for more than a decade. And so I was wondering if that's kind of your sense of kind of the spectrum of where these district plans are. There are some that are really, really out of date.
Go ahead, Kat.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So that is one thing that I'm currently working on. So as part of accreditation, there are a lot of different statutes and different expectations that we have for the districts. And so I am, in between all the other things, I am trying to go to all the districts' board docs and figure out, well, what do the districts actually expect as far as crisis management plans? And as Senator Ellis said, it really is all across the board. Some of them have very updated ones where it's 2020 as the date, and some are very, very dated. I think that, again, we can't really make any decisions or provide the support needed until we have a clearer idea of where the gaps are. So yes, it's all over the place at this point.
Further questions of Dickie or Kat? Anybody? Anybody? All right, we'll go to public comment then. I had that a minute ago. I remember it was Boyd Brown and Brian Farmer were both doing public comment on this.
Mr. Chairman, we have Brian in the room here.
Okay, I see him. Go ahead, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Brian Farmer, Wyoming School Boards Association. Just want to say that we do support this concept of threat assessment, recognize that as a best practice. There is a document that came out, the final report of the Federal Commission on School Safety on page 155 of the report. They begin their conclusions, and we're actually pretty proud that that really mirrors a statement that we submitted in August of 2018 to the Federal Commission. We think that many of the same priorities that we have are aligned with that report. And that's important to recognize. School safety and security requires a comprehensive report with preventative measures, facility and infrastructure needs, critical incident planning, critical incident response, after incident response, and really thinking about school safety and security from a broad perspective. So threat assessment is certainly an important part of the overall picture for school safety and security. I don't think that we received a request from WDE to write a letter of support. Kat, if you get a hold of me afterwards, I'd be happy to write one up, get that for you by Monday so you can put that with your stuff. I do think that the community in Wyoming has been really good at working toward these things together, whether there's legislation, no legislation. We again are happy to work with WDE on this, and hopefully WDE is aware of some fantastic resources, collaborative national resources that are out there. Of course, schoolsafety.gov just launched fairly recently. And schoolsafety.gov is a national collaborative of resources, both of federal agencies and working on collecting information from across the United States. There's also the Center for School Safety, which is a center of the National School Boards Association. We get daily information from the Center for School Safety. There was just recently a webinar where Center for School Safety and the schoolsafety.gov collaborated to make sure that they shared information with education folks from across the country. So this is resources, best practices from across the country, and we're hoping to share those with Wyoming districts. There are many Wyoming districts that are receiving at least Center for School Safety resources. So those are out there. We're looking forward to working with WDE on school safety projects. Safe to Tell is one that we worked together on in the past. It's been great for Wyoming, and I think we can continue to do that good work moving forward.
Very good, Brian. You'll share the school safety stuff with community colleges and University of Wyoming also, right?
Mr. Chairman, that's a great idea. I'd be happy to do that. I'll share it with them. I know that I did send the slide deck from the recent webinar. The centers are a little bit more focused on K-12 school safety. Of course, that's very broad. Everything from COVID-19 to suicide prevention and awareness, to hardening of facilities, to practices to make schools safe. So we will share it with our friends in higher ed. They're not as directly applicable to them, but we'd be happy to share.
Excellent, thank you. Questions for Brian? Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was wondering, Brian, as you've done research on this issue, and it might conflict with what I've found, but I think Wyoming's one of the only states that has like zero mention of school safety in its statutes. And so I'm wondering, as you go to conferences, you know, what you're learning about other states and what they've implemented, because what I've seen, you know, doing research on threat assessments is there are states like Virginia that have it explicitly required in their statute in great detail. And last session, you know, we proposed something that was very broad, left a lot for local control, local involvement, local definitions. And so I'm just wondering, as you're involved in this space nationally, what you think of the fact that Wyoming has no school safety legislation on its books.
Mr. Chairman, I would say, Senator Ellis, that Wyoming has brevity in its statutes generally. My experience has been that Wyoming is not as explicit as other states in mentioning individual elements. But that doesn't mean that Wyoming has not been well regarded. So for example, the Safe to Tell program, not necessarily directly mentioned in statute, but something that's well regarded nationally. Of course, we built our program after Colorado. Last September, I was at a conference in Estes Park, Colorado, and they've had a turnover of all of the people that they have involved in Safe to Tell in Colorado. And they're looking now back to Wyoming, a program modeled after their own program, to say, where did we maybe get away from where we wanted to be, and how can we get back to some of the good things that Wyoming is doing? So Wyoming is doing some things very well. Not all are mentioned in statute. If it's helpful to put things in statute, then I think we're certainly open to looking at that, considering that. But I really have not done research to say what's happening in statutes in other states. All I can say is that my experience in working with school safety issues across the nation is that nobody has said, how come Wyoming doesn't have it in their statutes? That's not come up. But I appreciate you've looked more than I have at statutes, so I just don't know.
Further questions for Brian? Thank you, Brian.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You bet. Dr. Boyd Brown.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Thanks for letting me talk again. School safety is one of those issues that I'm very passionate about. Really excited to hear that the Wyoming Department of Ed is trying to get a grant to help educate everybody across the state. I think that will be beneficial. Again, I think us working collaboratively together is just as important as having anything in statute. I would tell you that as I go across the nation and go to national conferences on school safety, I feel very prepared, especially in our own school district, that we're doing a lot of the things that we should be doing. You know, and we would be very happy to help any other district out there that may need some help. One of the things that I want to remind the committee about is as we look at threat assessments, there's not just one team that would look at those threat assessments. It depends on what the situation is. If it's a suicide or a self-harm issue, we would put a different threat assessment team together than we would if it was a school shooting or a threat to the school or a bomb threat. So it depends on what that is. And I want to just remind the committee that, or the Joint Education Committee, that sometimes we lack the authorities in some of our smaller communities to be able to put some of those people together. So I think some of the telehealth stuff, being able to have more behavioral health people across the state may help with some of that early intervention stuff. If it gets to the point where there's attack or bomb threats, again, I think most of our school districts have good relationships with their local law enforcement and state law enforcement that we can work through those things. Again, I think the Safe to Tell is one of those things with an anonymous tip line that gives us that opportunity to move forward. But really believe that, you know, trying to educate and trying to help those folks that are struggling out there that may need some help, would volunteer anybody from our staff. I know that there are a lot of other places across the state that are doing really well and trying to prepare for emergencies that would volunteer as well. As far as legislation, I think each year when we bring legislation, it kind of gets piled on, and then by the time it gets to the end of being piled on, people are saying, well, that's not exactly what we were thinking of, and that kind of harms it in the end. So I don't know how to help that, but again, I know that all of our districts out there are trying to do the best that they can to make sure that school is safe for each one of their kids. With that, I'll stand for question.
Questions for Dr. Boyd Brown? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Well, thank you. And Dr. Brown, I have to say that before you came on with your microphone, it kind of looked like you were jamming to some rock and roll music. And then I remembered that you're on the road. So glad you pulled over for a second to be a little safe there. And speaking of safety, appreciate your comments.
Well, my niece is graduating in your neck of the woods, sir. So I'll be there. If you want to have a drink at Poplar's tonight, we can do that.
Dr. Brown, you had mentioned telehealth, and that was one of the things that we were kind of looking into a little bit. How do you think telehealth could help us better? I mean, expound on that a little bit more.
You know, I just know from previous places that I've lived as a adult and young adult and student, that there are not behavioral health counselors in some of those areas. And whenever you're talking about trying to help somebody with self-harm or suicidal ideation, being able to have that at your disposal is very important. I think sometimes that the relationship that you can develop one-on-one when you're with somebody is important. But I think if we don't have that, the next best thing is probably just like we're doing now, doing the Zoom meeting with that person to try to do the best that you can. So I think that it's not the best thing, but it's the second best thing that we could do out there.
Well, sir, I have to agree, and that's why I was asking, because I think about our small towns in Wyoming and the troubles that they have keeping staff and getting staff to where they can hire them. And a lot of times they wear 2 or 3 different coats and do a lot of different jobs. And so I was just thinking that that'd be a great idea for little Matitsi or 10 Sleep or Arvada. So.
Absolutely, sir.
All right, thank you. Any other questions for Dr. Brown? All right, well, that wraps up that section then. In committee, that takes us up to comments and directives. I guess I went back through my notes while we were on break, and there was a comment that we should maybe tighten up the language or at least give the legislative intent on computer science if we would like to see it taught in K through 6, or if we just want to have it introduced or emphasized, or whatever adjective, the verb you'd like to use to be able to describe that. And then another one, of course, was telehealth, how we should handle that. So anybody like to chime in? Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if it requires a motion, but a letter in support of extending the waiver for school lunches being offered. That's a very loose motion, but I think if anyone has on the committee has a question about my intent, kind of in line of the email discussion we had earlier today, I'd make that motion if it's required.
Let's do make a motion out of that.
Move.
Second, Senator Office has second. Go ahead, Senator Office.
Thank you. As the second though, do we have, Senator Ellis, do you have a concept of how long or anything like that, or what conditions we should put on it, or do you just kind of want to let that sort itself out as we draft?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead.
I sent an email with some very basic language in support of a waiver. I think we can strengthen that out, have the committee review it. Alternatively, we could have the chair sign it if they feel comfortable, but work with our LSO in drafting to make sure it looks like what, or that it meets whoever's signing the letter, their approval. But I wasn't thinking an overly complicated description of the program.
Okay.
Just
sure.
support.
Just support. Thank you.
Go ahead, Matt Wilmarth.
Mr. Chairman, in that regard, also, we had some draft language from the Region 5 BOCES on this threat assessment letter. Would you like me to submit that to the committee for its review and approval before we send that to the Department of Education Region 5 BOCES? Or how would you like to handle that?
Yes, let's send it to the committee, get approval, get everybody's eyes on it, and then you can get signatures from Hank and I.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, same with the one with from Senator Ellis. Let's handle it the same way. Good. Representative Simpson, you had a question?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Ellis, was the waiver you were talking about the request from the Department of Education to USDA to fund meals for July and August? Is that the one is that what you're referring to? And Mr. Chairman, I'd like to take a vote on that. I truly support the meals program when school is in session. This is really unprecedented to go in July and August, and I'm worried about that.
Representative Freeman.
I don't know if it's unprecedented. I live by a school and they're handing out lunches all the way through the summer already. So I think it happens now. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the program on how it happens or how long it happens and who pays for it or that kind of stuff is I just see all the cars lined up to get lunches.
Senator Office.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll just tack on that. Yeah, our district hands out lunches and breakfasts under different circumstances in the summer. Also, we've certainly expanded it at this point in time, but yeah, it's just a general understanding that it's pretty hard to learn anything if you don't have food, and it's a community service that the districts have largely absorbed through their block grant. We haven't directly funded it, but it goes on.
Any other comments? Yes, Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, I think Representative, his question about whether or not we vote on it is totally appropriate because you did require a motion. And, this really is in response to COVID. I've been handing out lunches and there are definitely families in need, certainly in my community. And I know that, while the program may lend itself to abuse, I don't know what the percentage of that is, but in weighing the benefit of how it's helping low-income families in my community versus, anecdotally, a couple of families that maybe have abused the program, I think it's worth our effort to support continuing to feed those in our community.
Good comment. Yes, Representative Flintner.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I appreciate Senator Ellis's comments. I also appreciate Representative Simpson's. My concern is just, I know that my districts here are handing out meals as well, and I worry that once you start these programs, then there's never any possibility of rolling them back because people will soon expect it. And so that's my only concern, is that while I recognize the need to do this in this crisis time, I surely don't want it to become an expectation in the future.
Yes, I guess I'll have to make first word diaper.
Representative Brown.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just say, I believe the motion right now is to at least just draft the language or the letter. I don't think we're actually voting on the motion to approve this process or anything along those lines. I think there's a very well-balanced argument here on both sides. But the one thing that I would say at this situation is, yeah, this is probably, to Representative Simpson's statement, probably outside of the norm. We are certainly living outside of the norm right now. So I would think that just having the letter drafted, and then we can cast our votes via email later on this if we would like, but I'm fully in support of at least having the language drafted and at least let us take a look at it.
Any other comments? Go ahead, Representative Pete Perino.
Yeah, I just had a question. Does the summer lunch program augment the deficits that school districts experience in their lunch programs?
I don't know if we're qualified to answer each district's. Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Well, I don't know if I understood the question fully, but it does just contribute to the overall cost. Although in the past, there used to be like bridge funding and some other programs that were used in certain circumstances. So there were different pots of money that wouldn't necessarily go towards that. But we cut so much out of it. I don't even remember if there's any bridge funding left. Matt Wilmarth, you listening? Do we have any bridge funding left?
Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the bridge funding was actually not reduced as part of any reductions, unless you consider reductions in ECAs. But that was folded into the block grant in the 2017 session for the 2017-18 school year. That has not been reduced from the levels. And I'm not sure that it was necessarily used for purposes of food programs. It was primarily used for the staff to provide summer school and extended day programming.
Right. Mr. Chairman, I think my district used it and it would have gone towards a little bit of food in one of the programs they used. And I think they had pretty good flexibility as long as it was summer school, summer enrichment, after school programs, things like that. So I think they did use it in the off season, but now it sounds like it's in the block grant. That's right. That's what we did. So who knows whether it's being used for that or not. Thanks.
All right, remember, this is just for the draft language. That's
Mr.
what the question
The motion was to send a letter. Let me
Yep.
back up and say this. I sent you all via email just a little bit ago when we had this discussion, just kind of conceptual language that I received when I asked the governor's or the first lady's staff person to kind of give us some direction. And if you look at that language, it kicks off saying Wyoming currently has 250 sites that are offering food service during closures. 150 of these sites are 50% free and reduced. And so without this waiver, they're already asking for it. So this is a letter of support of a request that's already going out. So even if we don't send this letter, it's irrelevant. Like, we've already made this ask. And because there will be qualifying communities, but then there will be some that aren't. And so some of this is a bit of an equity issue in my view. You know, if your communities happen to be poor, they're going to still be eligible to receive some assistance. If they don't qualify as being that poor, but they're kind of teetering on the edge, then we're just leaving those communities out to dry. And so, Mr. Chairman, this was a good intention effort to lend some support to a request that's already been made to the USDA. You know, if you have problems with that conceptually, I understand it, but really the motion was to send a letter of support, not to talk about drafting it, because I've already sent you more or less the language. I think it's a good idea. And I will say it doesn't affect my communities, but looking at the list, it affects many of your communities. So, you know, that's a decision point for each of you to make.
Question.
Thank you.
Question.
All in favor signify by raising your hand. 8 now. Okay. Are those opposed? 4. Okay, I got it. That motion passes 4 to 8 or 8 to 4. Okay. So we'll get a letter put together, get you guys eyes on it, and then we'll get it out.
Mr. Chairman, quick question.
Certainly, go ahead.
Were you looking for motions on the other 2 items, or were you just letting us know, kind of doing a recap and kind of giving legislative or, you know, intent to the staff to go ahead and move forward? It felt like when you were talking about the K-3 computer science stuff, you may have been looking for or entertaining a motion on that to get legislative intent.
Kind of looking for a motion for legislative intent. What is the intent of the legislature on that? That was the question that was asked during public comment. Go ahead, Senator Ellis.
You're muted, Senator.
Oops, a daisy. Mr. Chairman, I would reject a motion to ask for that legislative findings at this point in time. Generally, our legislature disfavors the use of writing these legislative intents. When they pop up in bills, we take them out immediately. And I think it would be wrong to try and insert that after the fact. I think when we look at the entire basket of goods, we have all content areas that are listed in there. And there are some confusing elements. I mean, we have things that we readily think of as being a K-12 assignment, math, reading, science, but we also have things in there like humanities and things that are taught maybe more as an elective, like career and technical education. So if we start carving out our intent with computer science without putting a finer point on what we meant with humanities, what we mean with career and technical vocational education, what we mean with math, what we meant with reading, I think we add way more confusion than clarity. So I think if we're going to start going down this path of what we meant and what we didn't mean, we have to look at the whole basket, not just one content area. You know, this was my biggest concern when we were drafting or watching the drafting process of the content performance standards was, is this an attempt to somehow weaken what I believe our clear legislative intent was how do we start weaving in computer science and computational thinking in through K-6 or K-12. And so I'm just seeing it come to reality. I mean, my crazy conspiracy theorist ideas are now being presented to this committee for that kind of discussion. I think that's the absolute wrong direction we should be going as a committee.
Mr. Chairman, I would second those comments exactly.
Righty. And nothing on telehealth. Everybody's, yes, Chairman Coe.
Hey, Mr. Chairman, I agree with Senator Ellis. We just don't have a history of successfully putting legislative intent into legislation, and I think she's exactly right on. So I agree with Senator Ellis.
Yes, it was my intent just to bring it up for discussion, make sure that we had covered all the bases. So, okay, anything on telehealth? Anybody want to talk about it? No directives? Go ahead, Senator Landon.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'm a little fuzzy by Friday night at 5 as to what, if you've got something in mind, I'm certainly willing to consider or to probably even support. That's a really important piece of what we do. And just over across the street here is the Wyoming Behavioral Institute. you recall a couple of years ago, we learned that they had to trim back all of their adolescent beds. So I think that's an issue going forward that we need to be careful with and keep an eye on. I'm just not sure what we could take into late June that might be useful, or what sort of message we would give to whom. Maybe you could clarify a little bit what you were thinking.
I wasn't really thinking, like I said, I was just bringing it up because it was one of the points that was out there that we talked about. Wanted to make sure we left all the stones turned over and everybody was okie dokie with what we're doing. I just know that other committees are going to be working on broadband and everything else, and if we can't dovetail anything in, so we're just trying to cover all the bases.
I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. I agree.
Okay. Does anybody have anything, anybody on the committee have anything they'd like to talk about? Any other directives? None appearing, then we will be adjourned. Thank you.
Good to see everybody.
Take care, everyone. Good to see you.
Yep, stay safe.